Hey guys, tonight we are sliding open the creaky wooden doors of a time-long past, stepping very gently into the hushed interiors of ancient Japan. Imagine you're in a traditional Japanese house, the kind with paper shoji screens casting soft, geometric shadows, the faint, clean scent of tatami mats underfoot, and the deep, resonant quiet that only centuries of existence can bestow. We're here to listen, very carefully, for the almost imperceptible stirrings, the subtle whispers that might emanate from the everyday objects within, the old tools, the worn utensils, the cherished possessions that have served generations. Because in Japanese folklore, there's a charming, and sometimes a little spooky, belief that these humble items, after a very long time, can take on a life, a spirit of their own. Now, a word to the wise if you suddenly find your old, forgotten toaster from college starting to develop a personality and demand artisanal bread. It might be less ancient Japanese magic and more a sign you need to clean out your kitchen. And if it starts offering you cryptic advice on your love life, you probably won't survive this level of sentient appliance intervention with your sanity or your breakfast plans intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small click for you, but it makes a big difference to these nocturnal narratives. And, as always, I'd love it if you'd post your location and what time it is in your part of the world in the comments below. It's wonderful to see where these stories are reaching. I'm here in Vietnam, and it's getting nice and late. Perfect for a tale like this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a house that has weathered many seasons, perhaps in the Heian period, a time of refined courtly culture, or maybe a little later, in the Muromachi era, when samurai clans held sway and Zen aesthetics were taking root. The wooden beams above you are dark with age, polished smooth by time and countless hands. Light filters softly through the paper of the shoji screens, creating an atmosphere of serene, almost reverent, quiet. You know a house is this old when the floorboards don't just creak with your footsteps. They seem to sigh, to groan, almost as if they're delivering lengthy philosophical monologues about the good old days, the fleeting nature of human existence, and the ever-declining quality of modern wood polish. Look around you. The objects that furnish this space are not the mass-produced, disposable items of our era. A mainstream historical fact is that traditional Japanese households, especially before the advent of widespread industrialization, utilized a wide array of tools and objects meticulously crafted from natural materials like wood, bamboo, paper, silk, and clay. These items, lacquerware bowls still gleaming faintly in the dim light, ceramic teacups with slight imperfections that speak of the potter's hand, perhaps a rolled-up calligraphy scroll resting in a niche, a paper lantern shoshin waiting for its evening flame, were often used for many, many years, carefully maintained, repaired when broken, and frequently passed down through generations. This long use, this intimate connection with human lives, fostered a sense of accumulated history, an almost tangible presence within them. You might see a worn wooden chest in the corner, its metal fittings a dull, coppery green. Over there, a set of straw sandals Zori, perhaps a little frayed but still serviceable, placed neatly by the veranda. In what might be a kitchen area, a sturdy knife with a well-honed blade rests on a cutting block, its wooden handle darkened from years of use. Maybe there's a simple broom made of bound twigs leaning against a wall, or a folded paper and bamboo umbrella casa tucked away. Each object has a story, a silent history of service. It's in this atmosphere of deep stillness and antiquity that you might begin to feel it. A subtle shift, a feeling that these objects are not entirely inert. It's that peculiar sensation you sometimes get when you're alone in a very old room, surrounded by antique furniture. And you could almost swear that that slightly chipped ceramic teapot on the shelf is judging your life choices with a kind of weary resignation. Another cup of hastily brewed, inferior quality instant noodles, human, really after all I've seen. Or perhaps it's just the house settling, the wood contracting in the cooling air. Or is it this feeling, this inkling that well-used, long-loved, or even long-neglected items might possess something akin to a consciousness, a presence, is a delicate thread woven into the rich tapestry of Japanese folklore. It's not necessarily a frightening idea, at least not initially. It's more a sense of respect, an acknowledgement that something which has served diligently for a very long time, something that has absorbed the energies of human life around it, might eventually cross a threshold from mere thingness into something more. Folklorists and historians still debate the precise period in which the specific belief in tool spirits became widely codified under the charming name Tsukumogami, particularly with the intriguing 100-year rule for their animation that we'll explore very soon. Some scholars argue for much earlier, deeply ancient animistic roots, where spirits were perceived in all natural phenomena and perhaps, by extension, in crafted objects too. Others point to later developments, particularly in the Muromachi or Edo periods, when these ideas were popularized through stories, artwork, and performance. But the underlying feeling, the quiet whisper in the old wood of the house, the gleam in the lacquerware that seems a little too knowing, that's a timeless sensibility. Imagine the sounds of this old house at night. The wind sighs through the eaves. A floorboard settles with a soft pop. The paper in the shoji screens rustles almost imperceptibly. In such an environment, where the boundary between the mundane and the mysterious feels thin, it's easy to imagine these everyday tools, these silent witnesses to generations of human life, beginning to stir in ways that aren't entirely predictable. They've absorbed countless joys, sorrows, anxieties, moments of quiet domesticity, and perhaps even a few dramatic family arguments. All that human energy, all those years of service. What if it accumulates? What if it reaches a tipping point? And here's a quirky, and perhaps slightly unsettling, fringe tidbit. For you, some strands of Japanese folklore suggest that even the humble dust bunnies susuhare, those fluffy accumulations of neglect found in the forgotten corners of very old, seldom cleaned houses, could eventually gain a kind of rudimentary life or spirit. These weren't grand, powerful yokai, of course, but minor, mischievous entities that might play tiny pranks, misplace small objects, or simply signify the overall spiritual state or lack of cleanliness of the dwelling. So, next time you find yourself neglecting your dusting duties for an extended period, remember you're not just being a tad lazy, you might actually be cultivating a new generation of tiny, fluffy yokai, your very own personal dust bunny army. Probably less terrifyingly demonic, and more mildly inconvenient when they collectively decide to hide all your left socks. It is this sense of immanence, of spirit residing not just in grand temples or sacred groves, but potentially within the very fabric of your everyday existence, within the tools you hold and the objects you live with, that sets the stage for the truly enchanting belief in the Tsukumogami. The whispers are there, in the grain of the old wood, in the patina of the aged metal, in the weave of the worn straw. We just need to learn how to listen. You're in that old Japanese house, the scent of aged wood and faint incense in the air, and you're starting to feel it. That subtle sense that the everyday objects around you, the worn lacquerware bowls, the patient paper lantern, the loyal old umbrella, might be more than just inanimate things. You feel those whispers in the old wood, that almost imperceptible hum of accumulated existence. Now, let's uncover the charming, and sometimes a little bit alarming, core belief that explains just how these humble tools might awaken the magic of the 100th year. This is where we meet the fascinating concept of the Tsukumogami Fusang-shen, or sometimes written Joshijushen. The name itself is wonderfully evocative. If written with the kanji characters, Joshijushen, it literally means 99 kami, or 99 spirits. Now, why 99? In Japanese numerology and symbolism, 99 can represent many years, a great quantity, or something that is just short of completion, just shy of 100, which often symbolizes a kind of wholeness or divinity. So, these are spirits on the cusp, almost there. The other common writing, Fusang-shen, can be interpreted as tool object. Fu that has become old afflicted sang and gained a spirit kami-shen. Both point to the same enchanting idea that after an object, particularly a household tool or utensil, has faithfully served or simply existed for a very, very long time, specifically, upon reaching its 100th year, it can acquire a spirit reiken or mitama and become animate, transforming into a type of yokai or supernatural being. Imagine your old, familiar wooden broom, the one that swept up countless messes, hitting its 100th birthday. Instead of a quiet retirement in the corner with a tiny commemorative plaque and a pension of extra cobwebs, it suddenly sprouts a single, expressive eye, maybe grows a leg or two, or perhaps just hops around on its bristles, and demands to lead the conga line at the next local yokai festival. Talk about a dramatic midlife, or perhaps, more accurately, end-of-life, crisis for your cleaning implements. This is the essence of the Tsukumogami belief. Why 100 years specifically? In many cultures, a century is a profoundly significant milestone. It represents a venerable old age, a span of time that far exceeds a single human lifetime, especially in earlier eras. An object that has endured for 100 years has truly seen it all. It has been a silent witness to generations of human life, absorbing the energies, emotions, joys, sorrows, and everyday routines of the people who used it and lived around it. This long period of existence, this accumulated experience, was thought to allow a kind of spiritual gestation, culminating in the object developing a heart, a soul, a consciousness of its own. It's like the object has finally saved up enough life points to level up into sentience. The process of this transformation isn't always depicted as a sudden, poof, you're a yokai moment, though it could be. Sometimes it's implied to be a more gradual awakening, with the 100th year simply being the point at which its spirit becomes fully manifest and capable of independent action. The spirit that animates it isn't necessarily a brand new entity that hops in from somewhere else. Rather, it's often understood as an inherent potentiality within the object itself, a latent spirit that has slowly matured and finally comes to fruition after a century of patient existence. Now, it wasn't necessarily believed that every single tool that hit the century mark would automatically spring to life and start tap dancing across the tatami mats. Certain conditions might have played a role. Perhaps tools that were particularly well used, meticulously cared for, and imbued with the affection or respect of their owners were more likely to develop a benign or even helpful spirit. Conversely, and this is a common theme in Tsukumogami tales, objects that were carelessly discarded, mistreated, broken and not repaired, or thrown away disrespectfully before their time, especially if they were close to that 100-year mark, might animate out of a sense of resentment or bitterness, becoming mischievous or even malevolent. This belief underscores a deep cultural respect for objects, an understanding that even humble tools deserve consideration for their long service. It makes you think twice about how you treat your everyday stuff, doesn't it? That ancient-looking smartphone you've had for years and steadfastly refuse to upgrade, better be nice to it. On the anniversary of its 100th software update, it might just decide to text all your most embarrassing selfies to your boss, or worse. Start composing its own very critical reviews of your app choices. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of Tsukumogami, these unique spirits arising from old household objects, became particularly prominent and well-defined in Japanese folklore and art during the Muromachi period, roughly 1336-1573, and was further popularized and elaborated upon during the subsequent Edo period, 1603-1867, while more ancient animistic beliefs certainly existed in Japan, attributing spirits to all sorts of natural phenomena and perhaps even crafted items. The specific idea of tools commonly animating after approximately 100 years of service is strongly associated with influential texts and picture scrolls from these later medieval and early modern eras, such as the famous Tsukumogami Emaki illustrated scroll of tool spirits. Folklorists continue to discuss and debate whether this 100-year rule for Tsukumogami formation was a fixed, ancient belief from the very outset, or if it was perhaps a later literary or artistic convention used to systematize and lend a certain folkloric charm to a more fluid and much older spectrum of animistic beliefs regarding the spirits inherent in objects. Was it a hard and fast rule, or more of a poetic guideline? And here's a quirky and rather practical-sounding fringe tidbit for you. Some interpretations or folk explanations suggest that the 100th year wasn't always meant to be taken with absolute literalness, as 36,500 days plus a few leap years. It could, in some contexts, be a more symbolic term signifying a very, very long time of existence and a heck of a lot of accumulated use. This implies that a particularly well-worn object, or one that had been imbued with an unusually intense amount of human energy or emotion through its use, might mature into a Tsukumogami a little bit faster than its less utilized peers, like an overachieving teacup spirit graduating into yokai-hood ahead of its class, purely on merit and years of dedicated tea-related service. So, your great-great-grandmother's antique teapot is quietly sitting on the shelf, approaching its centennial anniversary. What do? Do you throw it a little birthday party with tiny, thimble-sized paper hats and a single flickering candle? Or do you perhaps start leaving out an extra portion of the finest gyokuro tea leaves every evening as a respectful offering, just in case it decides its true life's ambition, after a century of patiently brewing, is to become a renowned kabuki theater actor specializing in dramatic tea-pouring scenes? These are the delightful, whimsical, and sometimes slightly unsettling considerations that the belief in Tsukumogami brings into the quiet corners of an old house. It's a world where the mundane is always on the verge of the magical, and where even the simplest tool has the potential for an extraordinary second life. So, you're beginning to get that delightful, tingly feeling, that little frisson of what if, when you look at that 100-year-old wooden ladle or that antique paper screen in our imaginary ancient Japanese house. The idea that an object, after a century of quiet service, might just decide to wake up and join the ranks of the spirited is a charming one indeed. But this belief in Tsukumogami, these tool yokai, didn't just spring out of a vacuum. It blossomed from a much deeper, more pervasive spiritual soil, a worldview that saw the entire world as alive and imbued with spirit. To truly understand the Tsukumogami, we need to immerse ourselves, just for a little while, in the animistic embrace of Shinto, Japan's indigenous way of understanding the sacred. Shinto, often described as the way of the kami, is at its heart profoundly animistic. Animism in its simplest sense, is the belief that spirits, consciousness, or a life force can inhabit not just humans and animals, but also plants, rocks, rivers, mountains, the wind, the rain, and yes, even man-made objects. It's a worldview that sees the sacred not as something distant and wholly separate, but as something immanent, present in the very fabric of existence around you. With 8 million kami potentially fluttering about, you'd want to be polite to pretty much everything and everyone. "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Remarkably Mossy Rock. Terribly sorry to have leaned on you so unceremoniously, and a very good evening to you, Miss Slightly Bent but Still Elegant Twig. Lovely weather we're having for potential spirit manifestation, and a bit of light photosynthesizing, isn't it? The key concept here is kami shen. Now, kami is a wonderfully complex and nuanced term that doesn't have a perfect one-to-one translation into English. It's often rendered as god or goddess, and indeed, some kami are powerful deities with elaborate mythologies, like Amaterasu, the sun goddess. But kami can also be much more localized or specific spirits, the indwelling essence or sacred power of a particular place, a notable natural feature, a revered ancestor, or even an abstract quality like fertility or growth. A kami can be awe-inspiring and benevolent Nijimatama, the gentle, peaceful spirit, or sometimes more challenging. Even a bit rough and wild Aramitama, the rough, assertive spirit, requiring respect and sometimes appeasement. In traditional Shinto thought, kami are absolutely everywhere. Towering mountains like Fujisan are obviously kami, so are great, ancient trees shinboku, often marked with a sacred straw rope called a shimenawa, rushing rivers, serene waterfalls, uniquely shaped rocks iwakura. All can house or embody kami. The wind itself can be a kami, as can thunder. Revered ancestors, too, become kami, watching over their descendants. This idea of a world teeming with spirit is beautifully captured in the phrase Yaoyorozu no Kami Babai mo no Shen, which literally translates to 8 million kami. This isn't meant as an exact census of the divine population. Of course, it's a poetic expression for an uncountable, infinite number of spirits, a way of saying that the sacred infuses every nook and cranny of the cosmos. So, if the entire natural world is potentially alive with kami, from the grandest mountain to the smallest pebble, it's not such an enormous leap of the imagination to believe that man-made objects, especially those crafted with skill from natural materials and then used with care, or perhaps intense emotion over a very long period, could also come to house or develop a spirit of their own. This pervasive animism provided the fertile cultural ground, the perfect spiritual ecosystem, for a belief like the Tsukumogami to take root and flourish. If a majestic old cedar tree that has stood for centuries can be revered as a powerful kami, then why not a meticulously forged sword that has defended a family for generations, or a humble clay pot that has cooked countless meals, absorbing the steam, the scent, the very essence of family life over 100 years. The Tsukumogami can be seen as a specific category of kami, or perhaps a type of yokai supernatural creature or spirit, that arises specifically from an artifact achieving great age, and, through that longevity, a soul. This animistic worldview naturally cultivates a deep sense of respect for objects, particularly those that are old, well-crafted, or have served a long and useful purpose. It's like your ancient Japanese mom telling you, with a very serious look in her eye, "You be nice to that wooden rice paddle." Now, it's seen more family dinners and listened to more household gossip than you ever will. And if it gets to be 100 years old, it might just decide to start critiquing your cooking skills vocally. and possibly with a troupe of backup dancing soy sauce bottles. Treating things with care, mending them when they break, and disposing of them respectfully when they finally reach the end of their usable life, these weren't just practical considerations. They could also be seen as ways of honoring their potential spirit and ensuring they didn't become resentful or mischievous if they were to awaken. This sentiment is echoed in later, more formalized practices like harikuyo, the festival of broken needles, where old, worn-out sewing needles are thanked for their service and given a respectful retirement in a soft block of tofu or konnyaku jelly. While this specific festival is a later development, the underlying respect for tools it embodies has much deeper roots. A mainstream historical fact is that Shinto, as the indigenous spirituality of Japan, is fundamentally animistic. It is characterized by the profound belief in kami, these spirits, divine essences, or numinous powers that are understood to inhabit not only prominent natural phenomena like mountains, trees, and rivers, but also revered ancestors and, by a natural extension of this worldview, even certain man-made objects that acquire a special significance through great age, dedicated use, or the infusion of human emotion. This pervasive, deeply ingrained animism provided a fertile and receptive cultural ground for the development and acceptance of specific folkloric beliefs like that of the Tsukumogami. And here's a quirky and rather mind-bending fringe tidbit for you, extending this idea of pervasive spirit even further in some very old Shinto traditions and in related Japanese linguistic philosophy. It's believed that even words themselves could possess a spirit or inherent power, a concept known as kotodama yanling, the word spirit. The idea was that uttering certain words with clarity, sincerity, and focused intent could actually influence reality, bringing about good fortune or averting disaster. Conversely, careless, deceptive, or malevolent speech could have tangible negative spiritual repercussions. So, in this worldview, not only were your teacups and umbrellas potentially listening and developing opinions, but even your very exclamations of, "Oh dear," or "by the kami," might have had their own tiny spirit attached, listening in and perhaps taking notes on your eloquence, or lack thereof. Imagine accidentally summoning a minor deity of awkward social silences just by saying too many times during an important presentation. The pressure, the precise relationship and the lines of influence between these early, often uncodified, indigenous Japanese animistic folk beliefs regarding object spirits and the later, more systematized, and sometimes Buddhist-influenced, concepts of yokai, the broader category of supernatural monsters, spirits, and demons into which Tsukumogami are often placed, are still actively explored and debated by scholars and folklorists. There are compelling arguments for largely indigenous development rooted in ancient Shinto sensibilities, as well as evidence for significant continental cross-pollination of ideas, particularly from Chinese folklore and Buddhist thought, creating a wonderfully complex and layered spiritual tapestry. But at its heart, the path to the Tsukumogami begins with this fundamental embrace of an animated world. A world where spirit is not an exception, but a pervasive rule. A world where the line between thing and being is wonderfully, charmingly, and sometimes just a little bit unsettlingly blurred. You're comfortably nestled in that ancient Japanese house, surrounded by objects that hum with the quiet energy of centuries, steeped in that all-encompassing Shinto belief that spirits, or kami, can reside in almost anything, from a majestic mountain down to a humble pebble, or even, as we're discovering, a well-worn tool. We've established that after a good, long life, specifically, upon reaching its 100th year, an everyday object has the charming, and sometimes startling, potential to awaken, to become a Tsukumogami. But what exactly happens in that transformative moment? How does a simple, inanimate utensil cross the threshold into becoming a spirited yokai? The awakening itself, that birth of the Tsukumogami, is often imagined as occurring on or around that significant centennial milestone. Think of it 99 years of silent service, of absorbing the ambient energies of human life, the laughter, the tears, the daily routines, the quiet moments of contemplation, and then, on its 100th birthday, perhaps under a particular phase of the moon or during a specific liminal hour of the night, something shifts. A spark ignites. It's like your ordinary, everyday umbrella, the one that's faithfully kept the rain off your head for decades, okay? Maybe your great-great-grandparents' umbrella hits its 100th year. One minute it's a perfectly normal, if rather elderly, rain repeller, and the next, bowing. It's suddenly sprouted a single, rather jaunty leg. A large, expressive eye pops open where the handle meets the fabric, and it's demanding a tiny gaita sandal and a rather large share of your dango. It's like object puberty, but way, way faster and with significantly more haunting potential if you've been a neglectful owner. The nature of the spirit that emerges is a fascinating aspect of this belief. Most commonly, it's understood that the spirit isn't some external entity randomly possessing the old tool. Rather, it's the object's own accumulated essence, its inherent kami potential finally coming to full fruition. Over those many years, the tool has developed a kind of personality, a soul, born from its experiences and the energies it has been exposed to. Some theories also draw on concepts from Onmyodo, the way of yin and yang, suggesting that objects, as they age and become worn, naturally accumulate yin energy. This preponderance of yin can make them more receptive to spiritual animation, or can spontaneously generate a spirit. Now, what does this newly awakened Tsukumogami look like? This is where things get wonderfully imaginative and visually rich in Japanese folklore. Sometimes the animation is subtle. The object might still largely resemble its original form, but now possesses the ability to move on its own, to make noises with intent, or to exude a palpable, sentient presence. That antique wooden chair in the corner. It might still look like a chair, but now its creaks and groans seem to correspond with your conversation. Or it might just scoot itself a little closer to the fire on a cold night when no one is looking. More famously, however, Tsukumogami often undergo a more dramatic physical transformation. This is where they truly become yokai, supernatural beings with distinct, often bizarre appearances. They frequently sprout limbs, arms, legs, sometimes just one of each. They develop faces, commonly with a single, large eye, a recurring motif in yokai imagery, or perhaps a lolling tongue. The new form often hilariously or grotesquely incorporates features of the original object. A paper lantern might tear open to reveal a leering face and a long tongue. A forgotten koto, a stringed instrument, could sprout a hairy, bestial head and limbs, its strings now perhaps resembling sinews. A mainstream historical fact is that Japanese folklore, particularly as it was depicted from the Muromachi period, 14th to 16th centuries onwards, describes Tsukumogami not only acquiring a spirit tamashi or reikon, but often undergoing a striking physical transformation. They frequently sprout limbs. Faces very commonly a single, expressive eye, and other anthropomorphic or zoomorphic features, allowing them to move, interact, and generally cause a ruckus in ways their original object form simply could not. This visual and often very whimsical aspect is particularly prominent in illustrated narrative scrolls, like the famous Tsukumogami Emaki illustrated scroll of tool spirits. This transformation marks the shift from being a simple mono-a thing, an object to becoming a mono no keiwu no guai, which can be translated as the spirit of a thing, often implying a potentially malevolent or at least unsettling spiritual presence. Tsukumogami are a specific type of mono no kei, and thus a category of yokai yaoguai, that wonderfully broad Japanese term encompassing supernatural monsters, spirits, demons, and all manner of uncanny beings. Within the vast and colorful hierarchy of yokai, Tsukumogami are generally seen as less powerful or inherently terrifying than major demons Oni or ancient nature kami, but they are certainly capable of causing significant mischief, annoyance, or sometimes even genuine harm, depending on their disposition. And what determines that disposition crucially? The way the object was treated by its human owners during its long life often plays a significant role in the kind of Tsukumogami it becomes. This is a strong moral undertone in many Tsukumogami tales. Tools that were well cared for, respected, and perhaps even loved by their users might awaken as more benign, even helpful spirits. Or they might simply want to have a bit of fun. A harmless party after a century of dedicated, silent service. However, objects that were neglected, abused, broken, and left unrepaired, or, perhaps worst of all, carelessly and disrespectfully discarded just before they reached their 100th year, were said to become resentful Tsukumogami. These spirits might be angry, bitter, and prone to playing pranks, causing trouble, or even seeking outright revenge on those who mistreated them. The message is clear. Treat your belongings with respect, or they might just come back to haunt you. Literally. That rusty old garden hoe you angrily threw into the back of the shed 20 years ago after it gave you a blister. It's probably in there right now, patiently counting down the days to its centennial, nursing a significant grudge, and meticulously practicing its most terrifying, scary yokai lunge for your eventual reunion. Maybe leave it a small, apologetic offering of high-quality fertilizer, just in case. It's one thing for your great-grandmother's antique teacup to become sentient, and perhaps gently rattle in its saucer when it desires a refill. It's quite another if it suddenly grows little, spindly ceramic legs, develops a surprisingly judgmental single eye, and starts chasing the cat around the house, loudly demanding to be filled with only the finest ceremonial-grade matcha. That's when you know the 100th year has truly hit differently, and a new, rather opinionated, yokai has officially been born into your household. Here's a quirky and rather charming fringe tidbit. Some lesser-known folkloric tales and interpretations suggest that if a whole group of different household tools, say, a teapot, a broom, a ladle, and a few tatami mats, were all discarded together at the same time, perhaps during a big spring cleaning, and they were all collectively approaching their 100th year of service, they might undergo a kind of group awakening. They could then form a mischievous, chattering gang of Tsukumogami, banding together to plot their collective revenge on their ungrateful former owners, or perhaps just to throw a really weird, clattering surprise party in the attic. Imagine your entire kitchen drawer suddenly forming a yokai boy band, complete with a whisk for a lead singer and a couple of chopsticks on percussion. The extent to which the often comical or even grotesque physical transformations attributed to Tsukumogami in later Edo period popular art and literature, think woodblock prints and illustrated storybooks, reflect the original, perhaps more nuanced or subtle, folk beliefs about these object spirits, versus being an artistic or satirical exaggeration, primarily for entertainment purposes, remains a lively point of discussion among yokai researchers and folklorists. Were they always imagined with such visual flair, or did earlier beliefs focus more on an unseen spiritual presence? Either way, that moment of transformation, when a familiar, inanimate object crosses over and joins the vibrant, unpredictable world of yokai is a captivating cornerstone of this belief system. All right, so you're now fully aware that in the world of ancient Japanese folklore, the mundane objects around you, after a century of quiet existence, might just decide to throw a spiritual coming-of-age party and transform into yokai. We've seen how this birth can involve sprouting limbs, developing faces, and generally Cinderelling their way from humble utensil to spirited entity. Now, let's meet one of the most famous, most instantly recognizable, and frankly, one of the most charmingly absurd members of this Tsukumogami club, the Keiza Obake, the animated umbrella ghost. If you've ever seen any depiction of a classic yokai parade, chances are you've spotted this fellow. The Keiza Obake Tang Sanohuake, often translated as Chinese paper umbrella ghost. The kara refers to an older style of Tang Chinese umbrella, is the poster child for Tsukumogami. It's simple, it's memorable, and it's just the right blend of spooky and silly. The Keiza Obake is basically what happens when that old, forgotten umbrella you've had stashed in the back of your closet since that one unexpected downpour in, say, early 2025, or for our ancient Japanese friends, perhaps since the Kamakura period has a really, really weird dream after its 100th birthday and decides to fully commit to the new look. So, what does this iconic umbrella yokai look like? Well, you start with an old kasa, one of those traditional Japanese umbrellas made from oiled paper, often red, or another bright color stretched over a bamboo frame. Then, the magic of its 100th year kicks in. First, a single, large, and usually quite expressive eye, a hitotsum, pops open, typically right in the middle of the main paper canopy. This single eye is a very common feature among many types of yokai, giving them an uncanny, focused, and slightly unsettling gaze. Sometimes it's wide and staring. Sometimes it's narrowed and mischievous. Next, and perhaps most distinctively, the umbrella's handle, that long central shaft, transforms into a single, sturdy leg ippon ashi. And this isn't just any leg. It's very often depicted as wearing a traditional wooden sandal, a geta, on its foot. This one-legged stance gives the Keiza Obake its characteristic hopping or bouncing gait, a rather comical yet effective way for an umbrella to get around. A one-legged umbrella diligently hopping around on a single geta. That's true dedication to a very specific and slightly precarious aesthetic. It's probably terrible for any kind of long-distance travel or athletic competition, but absolutely excellent for making a sudden, dramatic, and delightfully wobbly entrance from behind a shadowy corner. And, just to complete the look, many kasa obeke are shown with a long, often exaggerated, tongue pero, lolling out from where the mouth would be, beneath that single eye. This tongue adds to its impish, sometimes slightly grotesque, appearance. Some depictions also give it two spindly arms sprouting from the sides of the umbrella canopy, allowing it to gesture or perhaps even grab things, though its primary mode of interaction seems to be hopping and startling. So, what does this animated umbrella actually do? Is it a terrifying menace, a harbinger of doom? Well, not usually. The Keiza Obake is generally more on the mischievous and startling side of the yokai spectrum. Its main delight seems to be surprising unsuspecting humans, especially on dark, perhaps rainy nights when you might actually be carrying an umbrella, leading to a moment of profound wait. Which one of you is sentient or confusion? Imagine you're walking home along a dimly lit path, your own trusty, but hopefully not yet 100-year-old umbrella held aloft, and suddenly, from out of the shadows, another umbrella, this one with a giant eye and a single leg, hops out and gives you a cheerful, if somewhat oily, lick with its enormous paper tongue. you wouldn't necessarily be terrified for your life, just incredibly confused, probably quite damp in an unexpected way, and definitely in need of a good towel, and maybe therapy. Lots of therapy. Their behavior is typically playful in a yokai sort of way. They might rustle their paper canopy ominously, make strange clattering noises with their gaita, or simply bounce into view when you least expect it, enjoying the surprised yelp they elicit. They aren't generally considered gravely dangerous on their own, more of a surprising nuisance or a fleeting spooky encounter. However, when they join a Hayaki Yagyo, that night parade of 100 demons which we'll explore later, their presence as part of a larger, more intimidating throng of yokai could certainly contribute to the overall atmosphere of terror. The origin of the Keisa Obake is, of course, that classic Tsukumogami story in Umbrella. Typically, an oil paper one reaches its 100th year of existence. Perhaps it was a cherished item, faithfully used and carefully stored. Or, more likely, given the often mischievous nature of many Tsukumogami, perhaps it was an umbrella that was forgotten in a dusty corner, broken and never mended, or disrespectfully discarded when it became a bit tattered. That accumulated century of existence, perhaps tinged with a little resentment at being neglected, culminates in its awakening. Its spirit takes hold, and its physical form warps and animates, the handle becoming a leg, the canopy a face, its original structure cleverly and comically reinterpreted into its new yokai form. A mainstream historical fact is that the Keisa Obake, or umbrella ghost, is indeed a widely known and very recognizable type of Tsukumogami yokai originating from Japanese folklore. It is typically depicted as an old oil paper umbrella that has come to life after many years of service, often specifically said to be 100, famously sprouting a single prominent eye, a single leg often shod in a gaita, and sometimes a long, lolling tongue. This creature became a particularly popular and frequently illustrated figure in Japanese art and popular culture during the Edo period, 1603–1867, appearing in numerous yokai encyclopedias, illustrated scrolls emaki, and woodblock prints akyo-e. Its simple yet striking design made it an instant classic. And here's a quirky and rather specific fringe tidbit for you related to its behavior. Some regional folk beliefs, or perhaps humorous Edo period literary elaborations, suggested that a Keisa Obake might develop a particular and rather unsettling fondness for surprising people by suddenly licking their faces with its long, oily paper tongue, especially on damp, misty evenings. It's a startling, if not exactly terrifying, and certainly rather unpleasantly slick and papery, form of yokai greeting, or perhaps just its way of saying boo. Folklorists and art historians continue to discuss the exact iconographic origins of the Keisa Obake's very specific one-eyed, one-legged form. Was it purely an imaginative artistic invention designed for visual distinctiveness and a bit of comedy within the crowded ranks of yokai parades, making it instantly recognizable? Or does its peculiar anatomy draw on deeper, older symbolic associations with umbrellas themselves, objects that mediate between us and the heavens, or offer shelter in liminal, stormy weather? Or perhaps connect to other single-limbed or single-eyed spirit figures that appear in broader Japanese folklore and animistic traditions? The precise genesis of its look remains a topic of delightful speculation. But whatever its deepest origins, the Keisa Obake, hopping along on its single gaita, its one big eye swiveling curiously, remains one of the most enduring and endearingly strange characters from the world of Tsukumogami. A perfect example of how even the most ordinary household object can leap into extraordinary, spirited life in the fertile imagination of Japanese folklore. So, you've just had a rather startling, perhaps even slightly damp encounter with the Kesa-obake, that iconic one-eyed, one-legged umbrella yokai hopping its way through the shadowy corners of Japanese folklore. It's a perfect example of how a very ordinary object, through age and that touch of animistic magic, can transform into something extraordinary. Now, let's turn our attention from things that keep the rain off your head to things that protect your feet, or, at least, used to. Prepare to meet another classic Tsukumogami, a creature born from an even humbler origin, the bakazori, the animated straw sandal. If the Kesa-obake is the slightly eccentric, attention-grabbing performer of the Tsukumogami world, then the Bakazori Hwa Kesau-lu, which literally means transformed straw sandal, or monster straw sandal, is perhaps its smaller, noisier, and more hyperactive younger sibling. Its origins are just as rooted in that core belief, an old, everyday object, a simple zori or traditional Japanese sandal woven from straw, reaches its 100th year of existence and poof, or rather, clatter, clatter, chant. It springs to life, your ancient straw sandal, after what must feel like an eternity of being unceremoniously stepped on, trudged through mud, and generally taken for granted, finally decides, nope, I'm done with this foot life. Time for a dramatic career change into the exciting world of minor nocturnal disturbances, Huo. What does this newly animated footwear yokai look like? Well, its base form is naturally an old straw sandal. But once it becomes a bakazori, it usually sprouts a pair of surprisingly nimble little legs, allowing it to dash about with remarkable speed. It also often gains a pair of small arms, perhaps for balance or for gesturing wildly as it makes its presence known. A simple face typically appears on the main body of the sandal, sometimes one eye, sometimes two, and a mouth, usually open as if in mid-chant or mid-complaint about its previous life of servitude. Unlike the fairly standardized look of the Kesa-obake with its single eye and leg, the bakazori can show a bit more variation in artistic depictions, but the core elements, an animated sandal with limbs and a face, are consistent. Now, the bakazori isn't known for its terrifying power or its particularly harmful intent. Its main mode of operation, its defining characteristic, is to run amok through the house, usually at night, creating a ruckus and, most famously, chanting a peculiar, distinctive phrase. This isn't some deep, philosophical pronouncement or a terrifying curse. It's more of a catchy, slightly nonsensical, and undoubtedly very annoying little ditty. The classic chant, repeated as it skitters and dashes through the corridors, goes something like this: Kararin, kororin, kankororin. Managu mitsu ni haninmai, kararin, kororin, kankororin. Yangu sansu ni hai harmei. The kararin, kororin, kankororin part is likely onomatopoeic, suggesting the clattering, rolling, tumbling sound of old sandals or perhaps wooden geta moving about. The second part, Managu mitsu ni haninmai, translates roughly to eyes 3 and teeth 2. What on earth does eyes 3 and teeth 2 mean? Well, that's part of its quirky charm. One common interpretation is that it's a taunting reference to traditional geta, those wooden platform sandals, which often have 2 teeth or supports underneath, and a single thong that passes between the toes, which, if you squint a bit and use your imagination, could be seen as a third eye or central point where the thong is anchored. So, the humble straw zori, now animated, might be making fun of its more structured wooden cousins. Or it could just be pure yokai nonsense, a bit of playful, spooky gibberish designed to be memorable and unsettling. The bakazori's chant is so distinctive. It's like the ancient Japanese yokai equivalent of a viral TikTok sound. You'd hear that kararin, kororin, kankororin. echoing down the hallway once, and then it would be annoyingly stuck in your head all night while you're desperately trying to sleep through the ongoing, tiny, straw-based haunting. So, its main activities are racing through the house, making a clattering or rustling racket, and endlessly repeating its little song. It's generally considered more of a pest, a noisy nuisance designed to startle and annoy, rather than a creature that will cause you serious physical harm. Its mischief level is usually set to mildly infuriating rather than genuinely terrifying. Imagine trying to have a quiet evening of contemplation or a good night's sleep, and there's this tiny, possessed straw sandal doing laps around your futon, chanting about 3 eyes and 2 teeth. You wouldn't call an exorcist, you'd probably just wish for a very effective, yokai-proof fly swatter. A mainstream historical fact is that the Bakazori is indeed a well-established type of Tsukumogami yokai in Japanese folklore. It is typically depicted as an old, animated, zori traditional straw sandal that comes to life after serving for a very long period or, significantly, after being neglected or improperly discarded. It is best known for its habit of running wildly through houses at night while loudly chanting its distinctive, often nonsensical phrase. The Bakazori is a common and recognizable figure in Edo period 1603-1867 yokai illustrations, story collections, and popular compendiums like Toriyama Sekien's Gazu Hyaki Yegyo, the illustrated night parade of 100 demons. The origin story of a Bakazori, like many Tsukumogami, is often tied to the idea of neglect or improper disposal. Zori were everyday items, relatively cheap, and prone to wearing out. It was probably common for old, tattered ones to be tossed aside without much thought. But if that sandal had faithfully served for many years, perhaps nearing its 100th, only to be unceremoniously discarded, it might just take umbrage. The spirit that animates it is often portrayed as embodying the sandal's accumulated weariness, and perhaps a touch of indignation at being underappreciated. Imagine the Bakazori's potential thought process. For 99 long, thankless years, I've been underfoot, enduring dirt, rain, and the occasional carelessly stubbed toe. Now, it's my time to shine. And by shine, I mean run around in endless circles making an absolute racket and thoroughly confusing everyone. Sweet, straw-filled, foot-stomping revenge, this yokai can be seen as a charmingly folkloric commentary on the importance of treating even the humblest of everyday items with a degree of respect and gratitude for their service. Or perhaps it's simply a whimsical personification of those unexplained scuttling sounds and strange little noises that old houses tend to make in the dead of night. Here's a quirky and rather humorous fringe tidbit for you: some regional folk beliefs, or perhaps just playful Edo period elaborations on the Bakazori legend, suggested that these animated sandals were particularly prone to targeting and pestering people who had exceptionally smelly feet, or those individuals who consistently and disrespectfully mismatched their sandals. Wearing 2 that clearly weren't a pair, in these tales, the Bakazori's nightly chanting and chaotic dashing about wasn't just random mischief. It was a form of highly specific, passive-aggressive, or rather, very active-aggressive footwear critique delivered directly from beyond the shoe rack. A sort of, your foot hygiene offends my very essence, and I shall sing about it until dawn. Protest. Folklorists continue to discuss the precise origins and the deeper symbolic meaning of the Bakazori's peculiar and very specific chant is kararin, kororin, kankororin, manegu mitsu ni haninmai. A fragment of some older, forgotten children's rhyme, or a playful folk song. Could it be a coded magical formula whose original meaning has been lost? Is the eyes 3 and teeth 2 a direct commentary on other types of footwear like the geta, as is often suggested, or does it hint at something else entirely? Or is it, perhaps most likely, just wonderfully catchy onomatopoeic nonsense, perfectly designed to be both memorable and slightly unnerving when heard in the dark? The beauty of yokai lore often lies in these delightful little mysteries. So, next time you're about to discard an old pair of shoes, perhaps give them a little nod of thanks for their service. You never know. You might just be preventing a future tiny, chanting, marathon-running yokai from disturbing your well-earned sleepy nights. Here on May 16, 2025, or any other night for that matter, you've just dodged the skittering, chanting bakazori, that hyperactive straw sandal yokai, as it raced through the moonlit corridors of our ancient Japanese house. It seems that even the humblest of items trodden underfoot can gain a rather noisy second life after a century. Now, let's lift our gaze from the floor and look to those objects designed to illuminate the darkness, for they too are prime candidates for a Tsukumogami transformation. Prepare to encounter another incredibly iconic and visually striking member of this spirited household brigade, the Shoshin Obake, the animated paper lantern ghost. The Chochin Obake Tidung, Ohwake, which literally translates to paper lantern ghost or paper lantern monster, is right up there with the Kasa Obake in terms of instant recognizability in the yokai pantheon. If you're picturing a classic Japanese ghost story setting, a lonely path at night, a spooky old temple, or perhaps a character nervously making their way home after a late-night visit, a flickering lantern would be an essential atmospheric detail. Now, imagine that very lantern, your only source of light and comfort in the encroaching darkness, suddenly deciding it has a personality, and a rather unsettling one at that. That's the Chochin Obake for you. Your trusty old paper lantern hits its grand centennial birthday, and instead of just quietly flickering out for good or being respectfully retired, it decides to get a dramatic facial reconstruction, yokai style. Surprise, I have a mouth now and a very long tongue. And I'm going to bob menacingly just ahead of you down this dark, unfamiliar alleyway. Isn't this fun? So, what does this illuminated yokai typically look like? You start with a traditional Japanese chochen, the kind of lantern made with a collapsible bamboo frame, covered in oiled paper, often cylindrical or slightly accordion-like in shape, with a candle inside providing the light. These were everyday items, used for lighting paths, marking entrances, or during festivals. Once it hits that magical 100-year mark and the Tsukumogami spirit awakens, the transformation is quite specific. The most dramatic feature is that the paper body of the lantern often splits horizontally right across its middle, forming a wide, gaping mouth. This split isn't usually a neat, tidy tear. It's often jagged, as if the paper has violently ripped open to reveal the newly formed maw. From within this newly formed head part of the lantern, above the gaping mouth, a single so large eye typically appears, much like our friend the Kasa Obake. Sometimes, though less commonly, two eyes might be depicted. This eye can be staring, glaring, or even comically rolling, depending on the artist's interpretation. And, of course, no self-respecting lantern yokai with a brand new mouth would be complete without a very long, often comically oversized, tongue lolling out, sometimes dripping or waggling expressively. To add to the effect, some Chochin Obake are depicted with wisps of unruly hair sprouting from their tops, or even with small, eerie flames flickering around their upper rim, distinct from the candle flame within. Unlike the Kesa Obake with its single leg, or the Bakazori with its multiple limbs, the Chochin Obake usually retains its fundamental lantern form. It's less about sprouting legs and more about its existing structure becoming an expressive, mobile face. It might still hang from a hook or be carried on a pole, but now it bobs and sways with a disconcerting life of its own, perhaps even floating a little. What kind of mischief does this animated light source get up to? Its primary mode of operation is to surprise and startle people. Imagine walking down a dark path, your old lantern held before you, and suddenly it tears open. A giant eye fixes on you, and a long tongue unfurls. That's enough to make anyone jump and possibly drop their basket of freshly gathered mushrooms. The Shochin Obake isn't typically going to chase you down the road with a weapon. It's more of a master of the perfectly timed, mildly terrifying, atmospheric photobomb. It's the yokai that leans into frame just when you thought you were safe. The light emanating from within it might also behave erratically, flickering wildly, changing color to an eerie blue or green, or casting unsettling, dancing shadows that transform familiar surroundings into something strange and menacing. It might also emit strange noises, a low groan, a sudden cackle, or simply the dry, unsettling rustle of its paper skin. Generally, the Shochin Obake is considered more startling and spooky than actively, physically dangerous, much like many of the more common Tsukumogami. Its threat level is usually more about psychological discomfort and a good old-fashioned fright than causing direct harm. However, picture encountering one as part of a hyaki yagyo, that night parade of 100 demons. A single, unexpectedly animate lantern might be unnerving. A whole procession of them, bobbing and leering amidst a host of other bizarre yokai, would certainly contribute to a terrifying spectacle. Its origin story follows the classic Tsukumogami pattern, an old paper lantern. Perhaps an Odawara Joshin, a cylindrical, collapsible type often used for travel. Faithfully serves its purpose for many decades. Paper and bamboo are inherently fragile materials, so for a lantern to survive for 100 years suggests it has either been remarkably well cared for or perhaps just incredibly lucky. More often, the implication is that it's an old, possibly torn or damaged lantern, one that has been neglected or was about to be discarded. That split which forms its mouth could easily be imagined as an old tear or a structural weakness in the paper suddenly gaining expressive, animated power upon its 100th anniversary. The spirit that awakens is that of the lantern itself, finally able to show its face to the world. A mainstream historical fact is that the Shochin Obake, the animated paper lantern yokai, is a classic and very popular example of a Tsukumogami that truly captured the Japanese imagination, particularly during the Edo period, 1603–1867. Its characteristic features: a paper lantern body that dramatically splits to form a mouth, a single large eye appearing above it, and a comically or grotesquely protruding tongue are instantly recognizable and appear with great frequency in yokai encyclopedias. Kabuki plays, where a lantern suddenly transforming could be a great stage effect. And vividly in ukiyo-e woodblock prints by artists like Hokusai or Kuniyoshi. Lanterns themselves held a significant place in Japanese life, not just as practical light sources but also in religious and festive contexts. They lit the way to shrines and temples. They adorned streets during Obon festivals to welcome ancestral spirits, and they were, of course, essential for navigating the night. The idea of such a familiar, comforting object suddenly revealing a monstrous or mischievous inner life would have been particularly effective in creating that delightful shiver of unease. It plays on the theme of the familiar becoming strange, the mundane becoming magical and slightly menacing. Here's a quirky and rather amusing, fringe tidbit for you in some playful Edo period depictions, particularly in humorous storybooks or theatrical interpretations. Choshinobeke were occasionally shown attempting to tell spooky stories themselves. They would use their own eerie internal light for dramatic effect, casting flickering shadows. But their actual narratives were often just a series of unsettling groans, gurgles, and the vigorous, enthusiastic waggling of their giant paper tongues. This, understandably, made them rather terrible, if undeniably enthusiastic, supernatural raconteurs. Art historians and folklorists continue to explore the specific visual development of the Choshinobake. For example, was its common depiction with a split body forming a mouth influenced by specific types of lantern construction that were perhaps prone to tearing or breaking in that particular way after long use, or was it primarily an imaginative artistic trope? A clever visual solution designed to give a naturally enclosed, inanimate object a means of expression and a more recognizably monstrous or yokai-like visage for popular entertainment. It's likely a combination of both practical observation and creative fancy. Imagine trying to read a scroll late at night by the light of your trusty old Choshinobake. One minute it's providing a nice, steady, if somewhat spooky, glow for your studies. The next, its long paper tongue is lolling all over your precious manuscript, and its single, unblinking eye is silently judging your choice of literature. Really, another collection of sentimental courtly poetry. Where's the adventure? Where's the drama? It would certainly make for a more interactive, if slightly distracting, reading experience. You've now been formally introduced to some of the A-listers of the Tsukumogami world, the one-eyed, one-legged Kasa Obeki umbrella, the chanting, skittering Bakazori sandal, and the leering, tongue-lolling Chochin Obeki lantern. These are the yokai that often grace the covers of folklore books and make prominent appearances in illustrated scrolls. But the enchanting and sometimes unsettling principle of Tsukumogami that everyday tools can awaken after a century of existence doesn't just stop with these famous few. Oh no, the potential for animation, for spirit to arise from long service or deep neglect, could, in theory, extend to a vast array of household objects, turning an entire antique-filled home into a potential yokai party waiting to happen. So, let's peek a little further into the shadowy corners and dusty attics of our ancient Japanese house and glimpse some of the other, perhaps less universally famous but equally fascinating, household haunters. Imagine the soft, melancholic notes of a biwa, that traditional Japanese lute with its distinctive pear shape, drifting from an otherwise empty room. This might be the work of a biwa boku boku pipa mu. This Tsukumogami is an old biwa that has come to life, often depicted with a somewhat grotesque or elderly human-like face and torso where the instrument's body and neck would be. It might play itself, its spectral music ranging from beautiful and sorrowful to eerie and unsettling, perhaps recounting tales of its former human masters or lamenting its long years of disuse. Your ancient lute hits its 100th year, sprouts a craggy face, and decides its true calling is to become a one yokai band. But the only song on its extensive set list is the deeply moving Dusty Strings and Existential Blues. It would certainly add a unique ambiance to your evening. Similarly, its cousin, the Koto Furanushi Chinguju, is a Tsukumogami born from an old koto, that long, elegant Japanese zither. Like the biwa boku boku, it might also develop anthropomorphic features and play mournful or enchanting tunes on its own strings. Its music echoing with the memories of past generations who once coaxed melodies from its aged wood and silk. Even objects associated with religious practice weren't immune. Consider the Shogoro Zheng Wu Lang, a Tsukumogami of an old temple gong shoko, or a similar metal percussion instrument. Instead of just resonating when struck by a monk, This animated gong might develop a face, roll around on its own, or emit strange booming sounds at unexpected times, perhaps offering its own unsolicited, percussive commentary on the temple's affairs. And what about the kitchen or storage areas? An old sake jar, a kame, that has faithfully held countless measures of rice wine for decades, might, upon its centennial, become a kamiosa ping chang, literally sake jar elder. This yokai is often depicted as a rotund, jolly-looking animated jar, sometimes with stubby limbs and a cheerful, if slightly tipsy, demeanor. The most delightful characteristic of the kamiosa is that it's often said to magically and inexhaustibly produce sake, becoming a source of endless free booze for those it favors. Now, that's a Tsukumogami I think many of us, especially on a relaxing Friday night like this May 16, 2025, could wholeheartedly get behind and offer a place of honor in our homes. More delicious sake, esteemed and sentient Jarsan. Oh, don't mind if I do. You're the best housemate ever. Of course. Some versions might just be grumpy old drunkard jars, but the endlessly refilling one is definitely the dream. Even items associated with warfare or the samurai household could take on a life of their own. The Furu Utsubo Gu Kongsui is the Tsukumogami of an old quiver, the container for arrows. Imagine it sprouting limbs, perhaps with its remaining arrows chattering restlessly within, or even trying to knock and draw themselves with its newly animated appendages, ready for a spectral hunt. And back in the kitchen, things could get decidedly bristly. The Yama Oroshi Shan Oroshi, sometimes written differently as a particularly strange yokai said to arise from an old, worn-out kitchen grater, specifically an Oroshi gain used for grating daikon radish or other vegetables. When this tool turns Tsukumogami, its sharp metal teeth are often depicted as becoming like the quills of a porcupine or a dense covering of stiff bristles, giving it a fierce, somewhat animalistic appearance. It might scuttle around, a tiny, metallic hedgehog of culinary doom, perhaps seeking out particularly tough radishes to vanquish, or just generally being an unnerving, scratchy presence. A particularly eerie and visually striking type of Tsukumogami is the Menreiki Mian Ling Chi, the spirit of masks. This isn't usually a single mask, but rather a collection of old No theater masks, gigaku masks, or other ceremonial masks that have been stored together for a very long time. They animate collectively, their diverse, fixed expressions, demonic, serene, comic, tragic, now mobile as they detach from the wall or their storage box and float or drift through the air, perhaps silently observing, or even attempting to communicate in some unsettling, voiceless way. Imagine a wall of ancient No masks, each with its own intense, stylized emotion, suddenly all turning their painted gazes towards you, then detaching themselves and silently gliding around your room, their fixed expressions forming a kind of silent, judgmental audience. That's not just a simple haunting. That's a full-blown, avant-garde yokai theater performance you definitely didn't buy tickets for, and from which you probably can't escape. A mainstream historical fact is that beyond the most universally famous examples like the Keisa Obake, Japanese folklore and dedicated yokai compendia, such as those beautifully illustrated by Toriyama Seikyen in the 18th century, like his Gazu Hyaki Tsurezure Bukuro, the illustrated bag of 100 random demons, depict an incredibly wide and imaginative variety of Tsukumogami. These could be derived from almost any kind of aged household object, including, as we've seen, musical instruments like the biwa boku from a lute, or the koto furunushi from a zither, revered tea ceremony utensils, old scrolls and books, and even humble kitchen implements. each with unique appearances and behaviors that often humorously or grotesquely reflected their original forms and functions. And then there are textile terrors. The Iten Momen Yi Fan Mu Mien, or 1 tan a unit of length of cotton, is a yokai that often gets mentioned in the context of animated objects, though its classification is sometimes debated. It appears as a long, white, deceptively innocuous-looking strip of cotton cloth, perhaps about 30 feet long, that flies through the night air. Its method of attack is rather terrifying. It wraps itself around a victim's head and face, smothering them. The open scholarly debate phrase here is, folklorists continue to discuss the precise classification of certain yokai. For example, whether the Iden Momen roll of cotton is a true Tsukumogami, originating from an object achieving 100 years of age, or if it represents a different type of spirit or elemental yokai that simply takes the form of cloth, highlighting the often fluid and overlapping boundaries within yokai categorization. Whether it's a true Tsukumogami or not, an encounter with a flying, sentient bolt of suffocating cotton would be an undeniably bad night out. The sheer variety illustrates the pervasive nature of the animistic belief. Almost any object that had served its time, that had been part of the human world for long enough, held the potential for this strange, wonderful, and sometimes unnerving transformation. And here's a quirky and slightly unsettling fringe tidbit for you. There are some delightfully obscure and lesser-known Tsukumogami candidates that are whispered about in very local legends, or playfully implied by artists in the corners of crowded yokai scrolls. One such example is the ungaikyo, a possessed or animated mirror. This wasn't just any old haunted mirror. It was said that an ungaikyo, after its century of reflecting human vanities and secrets, could supposedly show reflections from other worlds, glimpses into the yokai dimension, or even have the terrifying ability to trap the souls of those who gazed into it too deeply. Imagine trying to quickly check your hair in the morning before heading out, and instead of your own familiar face, you accidentally get a live, unsolicited video feed from the yokai spirit world. That's certainly one way to wake up very, very quickly. This rich imaginative landscape shows us that the ancient Japanese home wasn't just a collection of inert possessions. It was a potential theater for the supernatural, where the line between object and entity was delightfully, and sometimes alarmingly, thin. You've now met a delightful and diverse cast of Tsukumogami, from the iconic one-eyed Kasa Obake umbrella and the chanting Bakazori sandal, to the leering Chochin Obake lantern, and even a brief glimpse into a whole household's worth of potentially animated musical instruments, sake jars, and kitchen graters. It's clear that in the world of ancient Japanese folklore, almost any old tool, given a century of quiet contemplation or perhaps simmering resentment, could decide to join the yokai parade. But what exactly are they like, these newly spirited objects? Are they all just out for a bit of harmless fun? Or is there a more serious, perhaps even sinister, side to their newfound animation? Let's explore the general temperament of Tsukumogami. Are they driven by mischief, malice, or just a delightful touch of centuries-old quirkiness? The first thing to understand is that Tsukumogami, much like humans and indeed, much like other yokai, don't all share a single, monolithic personality. Their temperaments can span a wide spectrum. Some are depicted as relatively harmless, perhaps even a bit goofy, their antics more annoying than alarming. Others can be genuinely mischievous pranksters, delighting in causing confusion and minor chaos. And then there are those who animate with a distinct sense of grievance, their actions fueled by resentment and a desire for a rather personal form of vengeance. It really depends on the object, its history, and often how it was treated during its long, inanimate existence. Many Tsukumogami seem to fall into the mischievous prankster category. Think of them as the yokai equivalent of poltergeists, but with a lot more personality and often a very specific backstory related to their former function. They might delight in hiding small, important objects. Where did that calligraphy brush get to? Why is there only one chopstick? Only for them to reappear in the most unexpected places. They might create strange noises in the dead of night, the sudden clatter of a pot lid when no one is in the kitchen, the rustle of paper screens when there's no breeze, or perhaps the distinct, if tiny, sound of little straw sandal feet pattering down the hallway. The Keisa Obake suddenly hopping out to startle a traveler, or the Choshin Obeke flashing its eerie light and lolling its tongue, often seem motivated more by a desire to get a reaction, to express their newfound aliveness in a startling way, than by any deep-seated desire to cause genuine harm. Their goal isn't usually to inflict lasting injury, but to remind humans that the world is stranger and more spirited than they might think. However, a very significant theme in Tsukumogami lore, particularly prominent in illustrated scrolls like the Tsukumogami Amaki, is that of vengeance or resentment. This is especially true for tools and objects that were carelessly discarded, broken through neglect, or treated with disrespect, particularly if this happened just as they were approaching their 100th year, on the very cusp of their spiritual awakening. Imagine the indignation. After 99 years of faithful service, keeping you dry, helping you cook, illuminating your path, to be tossed out onto a rubbish heap without so much as a thank you for your service. It's enough to make any self-respecting antique turn yokai. These resentful Tsukumogami might actively seek out their former owners to exact a kind of karmic payback. This might involve breaking other household items, creating persistent and annoying disturbances, or in some tales, even causing minor physical discomforts or illnesses. This aspect of the Tsukumogami belief can be seen as a powerful folkloric endorsement of the concept of motenai, that sense of regret concerning waste, and the importance of treating objects, even humble ones, with gratitude and respect for their utility and the resources that went into them. So, the moral of the story is always be nice to your appliances, and perhaps thank your old umbrella before you retire it. You don't want your 99-year-old rice cooker to suddenly animate and launch a long-term, passive-aggressive campaign of serving you exclusively slightly burnt, vaguely disgruntled rice for all eternity. Then there are those Tsukumogami who seem to be driven more by a kind of quirky expressiveness or a desire to simply live out their new, animated existence to the fullest. However strange that might look to us, the Bakazori, for example, with its incessant chanting and running, doesn't usually seem overtly malicious, it's just being a Bakazori. It's got a song in its non-existent heart, or at least in its straw-woven mouth, and it's going to share it with the entire household, whether they appreciate pre-dawn yokai karaoke or not, the biwa boku boku, or kotofuru nushi, those animated musical instruments, might play mournful or beautiful tunes, perhaps expressing the emotions and memories they've absorbed over their long lives, or simply reveling in their ability to create sound without human hands. Their actions aren't necessarily aimed at anyone. They're more about an outpouring of their newly awakened spirit, their inner objectness finding a voice. Imagine trying to explain to your slightly bewildered house guests, "Oh, please don't mind the incessant, slightly off-key chanting emanating from under the floorboards. That's just Bakazori-san. He's mostly harmless, just very, very passionate about his vocal exercises, and a bit of an exhibitionist when it comes to nocturnal sprints. Generally, unlike some of the more formidable oni demons or truly malevolent spirits in Japanese folklore, Tsukumogami are rarely depicted as forces of absolute, world-ending evil. Their power is often quite localized, their concerns more domestic or personal. Their ambitions usually run more towards successfully hiding all the left socks in the entire district, or perhaps finally winning that long-simmering philosophical argument with the smug antique lacquerware bowl about who precisely saw more historically significant dinner parties. It's often yokai domestic drama, on a charmingly small, if occasionally disruptive, scale. A mainstream historical fact is that Japanese folklore surrounding Tsukumogami frequently attributes their specific temperament and subsequent actions to how they were treated by their human owners during their long, inanimate existence. Objects that were well cared for, valued, and then respectfully retired or passed down might, if they animated, remain benign, perhaps even quietly unnoticeable in their sentience. Conversely, and this is a much more common theme in the surviving stories and art, those tools and utensils that were carelessly discarded, broken through neglect, or abused during their service were widely believed to animate with a potent spirit of resentment. This could lead to a wide range of mischievous, troublesome, or even overtly vengeful behavior, a theme particularly prominent in narrative picture scrolls like the Tsukumogami Amaki, which often depict a veritable army of discarded tools marching off to take revenge on their wasteful former masters. Could Tsukumogami ever be actively benign or helpful? While the angry discarded tool is a very strong and popular trope, the underlying Shinto animistic respect for objects does suggest that well-treated items, if they were to animate, wouldn't necessarily turn malevolent. Perhaps they'd become quiet house guardians or simply continue their service in a more spirited way. However, the most famous and enduring Tsukumogami tales, the ones that get illustrated and retold, often focus on the ones causing a stir, because, let's face it, a quietly helpful animated teapot, while lovely, doesn't make for nearly as exciting a story as one that's currently leading a rebellion of disgruntled cutlery. Here's a quirky, and rather endearing, fringe tidbit. For you, there's a charming sub-belief that some Tsukumogami, particularly those born from items associated with learning, scholarship, or the fine arts, like very old books, calligraphy brushes, or perhaps even ancient musical instruments, might develop a rather snobbish, pedantic, or even overtly critical personality upon awakening. Imagine your antique dictionary yokai suddenly starting to heckle your Scrabble game from the bookshelf, loudly pointing out your suboptimal vowel usage, or your great-grandfather's koto Tsukumogami offering unsolicited, and probably quite harsh, critiques of your clumsy attempts to learn the instrument. It adds a whole new layer of potential intellectual intimidation to your household clutter. Folklorists continue to debate the primary psychological or social function of these wonderfully diverse Tsukumogami stories. Were they mainly cautionary tales, designed to encourage the proper care and respectful disposal of objects, a sort of early animistic form of environmentalism or anti-consumerist sentiment, reminding people of the value of what they have? Or did these tales serve more as a whimsical, imaginative explanation for all those everyday domestic annoyances, those unexplained creaks, missing items, and strange little occurrences that happen in old houses, attributing them to a hidden world of spirited objects? It's likely a delightful combination of both, and more. So, you've encountered a veritable parade of these animated Tsukumogami, from the mischievous Kasa Obake umbrella to the chanting Bakazori sandal, and a whole host of other household items potentially imbued with a quirky and sometimes grumpy spirit after their 100th year. We've also learned that their temperament, whether they turn out to be playful pranksters, resentful haunters, or just endearingly eccentric yokai, can often depend heavily on how they were treated by their human owners during their long, inanimate lives. This naturally leads to a very practical question if you were living in ancient Japan, surrounded by tools and objects steadily inching towards their spiritual awakening. What could you actually do to prevent a full-blown yokai uprising in your kitchen drawer or a hostile takeover by your antique umbrella stand? The answer lies in a culture of appeasement, respect, and mindful practice. The primary motivation for these practices was, quite simply, the desire for a harmonious household, free from the disturbances, annoyances, or even genuine malice that a resentful Tsukumogami might bring. Nobody wants their sleep disturbed by a hyperactive straw sandal doing laps around their futon, or their important documents constantly being hidden by a peevish old scroll. So, preventing your possessions from turning into disgruntled yokai, or at least ensuring that if they did awaken, they'd be of a more benign disposition, was a matter of some importance. This began with respectful treatment during an object's lifetime of service. In a culture deeply influenced by Shinto animism, where spirits could reside in anything, and later by Buddhist concepts of karma and interconnectedness, the idea of valuing tools and possessions wasn't just about practicality, it had a spiritual dimension. This meant taking care of your belongings, not being unnecessarily rough or wasteful with them. It meant mending a cracked bowl rather than immediately discarding it, sharpening a dull knife, repapering a torn lantern. This act of repair, of extending an object's useful life, showed respect for its service, for the materials it was crafted from, and for the labor that went into its making. This ties in beautifully with the Japanese cultural concept of motenai wuti wuai, that feeling of regret concerning waste, an inherent sense that objects, resources, and even opportunities possess an intrinsic dignity or spirit that shouldn't be squandered or treated disrespectfully. You can almost hear an ancient Japanese grandparent observing a younger family member about to carelessly toss a slightly chipped but still perfectly usable teacup, saying with a sigh, "You're throwing out that perfectly good, if perhaps slightly haunted-looking teacup back in my day. We'd have cherished it for another 50 years, respectfully acknowledged its growing sentience, and by its 100th birthday. It would have probably learned to brew the tea for us and offer insightful life advice kids these days. No respect for their elders or their elder teaware. But even with the best care, objects eventually wear out or break beyond repair. This moment, particularly if the item was very old and approaching that critical 100-year mark, was seen as particularly sensitive. You didn't just chuck a 99-year-old teapot into the general refuse pile with yesterday's fish bones. That was practically sending it an engraved invitation to come back as a grumpy, leaky, and vengeful yokai. Instead, there were traditions of proper and respectful disposal. One important set of practices revolves around kuyo gong yang, which are essentially memorial services, or rites of pacification held for objects, particularly those that have served people well or have a strong connection to human life. The idea is to express gratitude for the object's long service, to acknowledge its spirit or accumulated essence, and to allow it to rest in peace rather than becoming a restless or disgruntled Tsukumogami. While the formalization of specific kuyo festivals for certain items, like the well-known harikuyo for broken sewing needles where old needles are retired into soft blocks of tofu or konnyaku jelly, ningyo kuyo for dolls, or fude kuyo for calligraphy and painting brushes, became more prominent in later periods, particularly the Edo period. The underlying sentiment of respectfully decommissioning worn-out tools has much deeper cultural and animistic roots. It's about closure and acknowledgement. Sometimes, old or broken sacred objects, like amulets from a shrine, or even particularly venerable everyday tools might be respectfully burned, often within the precincts of a Shinto shrine or a Buddhist temple. This wasn't an act of destruction, but rather one of purification and release, returning the object's material form to the elements and allowing its spirit to depart peacefully. Others might be taken to shrines or temples for proper ritual disposal, acknowledging their connection to the sacred or simply ensuring they weren't treated as mere trash. Annual household purification rituals also played a role. The traditional end-of-year deep cleaning known as Susuhare Mei Fu-ai, or soot sweeping, was a major event. This wasn't just about achieving physical cleanliness for the New Year festivities. It was a significant spiritual purification of the entire house and all its contents. By thoroughly cleaning every nook and cranny, repairing what was broken, and perhaps rearranging things, families were also symbolically sweeping away any accumulated negativity, bad luck, or stagnant energies from the past year. This act of cleansing and renewal could also be seen as appeasing any old or potentially restless objects within the home, keeping their spirits calm and discouraging any unwanted yokai transformations. So, in ancient Japan, your annual spring cleaning, even if it was done in winter, wasn't just about dusting the cobwebs. It was a high-stakes spiritual negotiation with all your aging possessions. Okay, Mr. 98-year-old lacquerware ladle. We've certainly had some wonderful soups together over the decades, but it's time for your annual spiritual spa day. Please don't come back next month and decide to haunt my miso. We good. Beyond these more formal practices, simple, everyday acts of respect could also contribute to a harmonious relationship with one's belongings, handling objects with a degree of care and mindfulness, not taking their utility for granted. Perhaps even a silent internal acknowledgement or a quiet word of thanks for their service after use. These subtle attitudes could, in an animistic worldview, influence the feelings or the accumulating spiritual essence of an object. The hope was that such ongoing respect would ensure that if an object did eventually awaken as a Tsukumogami, it would be more likely to be benign, perhaps even protective, rather than troublesome or vengeful. A mainstream historical fact is that the deeply ingrained Japanese cultural concept of motenai, which expresses a profound regret concerning waste and emphasizes respect for all objects and their inherent value, alongside pervasive Shinto animistic beliefs, naturally fostered practices aimed at the proper care and respectful disposal of tools and household items. This included the development of rituals like kuyo memorial services for specific objects like needles or dolls, which, while evolving and becoming more formalized over time, reflect an ancient and underlying desire to appease the spirits of old items, thank them for their service, and thereby prevent them from becoming resentful or mischievous Tsukumogami. Now for a quirky and rather cautious fringe tidbit. Some very old household manuals or snippets of folk traditions apparently advised that if you absolutely had to discard an old tool that you suspected was nearing its troublesome centenary, and you couldn't perform a full kuyo, you should at least try to blind it first. This might involve, for example, breaking off the eye of an old needle, deliberately cracking a pot slightly in a new place, or scratching the surface of a mirror. The idea, presumably, was that the object wouldn't be able to see who discarded it, or perhaps wouldn't be able to find its way back to haunt you. Alternatively, one might whisper a polite apology to it before letting it go. It's like trying to get an ancient yokai prevention get-out-of-jail-free card, but it probably wasn't entirely foolproof if the object was truly determined. Right, this rather ominous-looking teapot is definitely 99 years, 364 days, and 23 hours old. Quick, Goro. poke its spout slightly with this bamboo stick so it can't clearly identify me when I sneak it out to the communal retirement home for potentially vengeful ceramics tonight. And everyone just act natural. Nothing to see here. Desperate times sometimes called for desperate, and slightly weird, preventative measures. The extent to which highly formal kuyo ceremonies for a wide range of everyday household tools beyond specific, culturally significant items like noodles, dolls, or writing brushes were a widespread practice in the earlier Heian or Muromachi periods, versus being more common or achieving greater formalization and public visibility in the Edo period and later, is still a subject that scholars of Japanese religious practices and folklore continue to investigate. They carefully try to distinguish truly ancient sentiments and simple folk practices from later, more elaborate ritual developments. But the core idea is clear in a world where your possessions might just wake up and talk back, or chant, or hop, or lick you. Treating them with a little respect was simply good spiritual insurance. You've learned how to treat your venerable household tools with the proper respect, perhaps performing little household rituals of care and gratitude, all in the hope of preventing a yokai uprising in your storage chest or ensuring that any Tsukumogami that does awaken is more of a quirky housemate than a vengeful haunter. This focus on individual objects and their potential spirits is fascinating. But sometimes, in the grand, teeming world of Japanese folklore, these newly animated tools didn't just stay home and cause domestic disturbances. On certain, special, spooky nights, they might just decide to join a much larger, far more chaotic, and infinitely more terrifying supernatural event, the Hayaki Yagyo by Gui Yeishing, the night parade of 100 demons. Picture this: it's a deep, moonless summer night. The air is heavy, humid, and unnaturally still. You, a resident of ancient Kyoto perhaps, have been warned. You've shuttered your windows, bolted your doors, and are huddled inside, trying not to listen too closely to the sounds from the street. Because tonight is a night when the Hayaki Yagyo walks. The 100 demons isn't meant to be a precise head count. By the way, Hayaku, or 100 in this context, is more like countless, a vast multitude, an overwhelming swarm. This isn't a festive lantern parade with cheerful floats. This is a terrifying, cacophonous, and utterly chaotic procession of pretty much every yokai, spirit, demon, and monstrous being imaginable, all rampaging through the darkened streets together. Spotting the Hayaki Yagyo was less like catching a rare and beautiful bird in flight, and more like accidentally stumbling into a supernatural heavy metal concert that has violently merged with a very chaotic, deeply unsettling costume party, where every single attendee has gleefully forgotten their sanity at home. Best to just pull the covers over your head, pretend you saw absolutely nothing, and back away very, very slowly into your futon. The atmosphere of such a parade would be overwhelming. Imagine the sounds a dissonant symphony of unearthly music played on phantom instruments. High-pitched shrieks and guttural roars, maniacal cackles and sorrowful wails, the rustling of unseen garments, the clattering of bones, and, of course, the distinctive noises of our Tsukumogami friends joining the fray. You might hear the kororin, kankororin of a whole troop of Bakezori sandals skittering past, the papery rustle and eerie groans of Chochinobak lanterns bobbing along. Perhaps even the mournful twang of a biwa boku boku lute adding its tune to the terrifying din. Visually, it would be a nightmarish phantasmagoria, a chaotic, seething throng of bizarre and grotesque forms, illuminated by the eerie, flickering lights of those aforementioned Choshinobake, or perhaps by strange spectral glows and wisps of foxfire kitsunebi. Shadows would writhe and dance in unnatural ways. You'd glimpse contorted faces, too many eyes or too few, limbs in the wrong places. Creatures that are part animal, part human, part nightmare, and the smells. A truly pungent miasma of sulfur, decay, damp earth. The coppery tang of something ancient and vaguely threatening, perhaps mixed with strange, cloying perfumes from otherworldly flowers or incense. The overwhelming feeling would be one of immense supernatural power, raw chaos, and profound danger to any unfortunate human who happened to be in its path. When did these terrifying parades occur? Folk belief varied, but they were often associated with specific nights of the year. Frequently during the hot, unsettling summer months when the boundaries between worlds were thought to be thinner. Some traditions linked them to particular astrological conjunctions, the dark of the moon, or certain days in the old lunisolar calendar that were considered unlucky or spiritually charged. The parade would often be described as moving from one spiritually potent or liminal area to another, perhaps emerging from an old graveyard, sweeping through the main thoroughfares of a city like Kyoto, and heading towards a remote mountain shrine or disappearing back into the darkness from whence it came. And who exactly were the participants in this monstrous procession? It was a veritable who's who of the yokai world. You'd have your powerful oni demons or ogres, often large and fearsome, brandishing iron clubs and leading the charge. There would be a host of animal yokai, cunning kitsune fox spirits, perhaps in human guise or with multiple tails, mischievous tanuki raccoon dogs with their shape-shifting abilities and comically large scrotums, vengeful bakaneko monster cats, and a horgodish tengu bird-like mountain goblins with their long noses and magical feathered fans. Spirits of nature might join in, too, if they were feeling particularly rowdy. Ancient tree spirits lumbering along, river sprites slithering past. And, crucially for our story, the Tsukumogami would absolutely be part of this wild rumpus. This was their night out, their chance to mingle with the broader yokai community, to stretch their newly animated limbs, and perhaps to collectively vent any frustrations they might have with their former human owners. Imagine the Kesa Obake hopping gleefully or menacingly amidst the throng, its single eye swiveling. Picture dozens of bakazori sandals racing and chanting in a chaotic chorus line. See the Chochin Obake lanterns bobbing like eerie, disembodied heads, their tongues lolling. The Biwa Boku Boku and Kota Furanushi might form a discordant orchestra, while old temple gongs, the shogoro, roll and boom. Even the bristly Yama Oroshi grater might find its place, perhaps scuttling underfoot. The Tsukumogami and the Hyaki Yagyo were probably like the incredibly enthusiastic but perhaps slightly less genuinely terrifying opening act for the big, scary Oni headliners. And now, ladies and gentlemen, ghouls and goblins, please give it up for the one-legged umbrella and the perpetually chanting sandal. They'll startle you gently and make a bit of a racket before the real, soul-chilling terror begins. They added to the sheer numbers, the overwhelming weirdness, and the unnerving sense that anything could come to life and join this supernatural street party. Witnessing the Hyaki Yagyo was considered extremely perilous for humans. It wasn't a spectacle you'd buy tickets for. If you were caught outdoors, or even peeked through your shutters, the consequences could be dire, sudden death. Being spirited away to the yokai realm from which return was unlikely or would leave you irrevocably changed, debilitating illness, or being driven completely mad by the sheer terror and otherworldly nature of the sight. This was not something one sought out. It was something one fervently prayed to avoid. So, what protective measures could you take? The most obvious and effective was simply to stay indoors. Lock your doors tightly, and make sure all your window shutters were securely fastened. If you knew it was a night when the parade was likely, you'd observe a kind of supernatural curfew. Specific charms and amulets, particularly Ofuda talismans or inscriptions obtained from Shinto shrines or Buddhist temples designed to repel evil spirits or yokai, might be posted over doorways or windows. The devout might spend the night chanting Buddhist sutras or Shinto prayers, norito for protection, their voices a small human counterpoint to the demonic cacophony outside. And, in some traditions, it was believed that onmyoji, those masters of yin-yang divination, esoteric cosmology, and magical practices, had the power to predict the occurrence of such parades. They might even be called upon to perform rituals to divert the parade away from inhabited areas, or, in some tales, even to confront and attempt to dispel the yokai, though that would be a task for only the most powerful and courageous adepts. A mainstream historical fact is that the Hayaki Yagyo, or Night Parade of 100 Demons, is a very prominent and recurring motif in Japanese folklore, art, and literature. It represents a chaotic, terrifying procession of countless yokai, explicitly including Tsukumogami among their ranks, that was widely believed to occur on certain nights of the year. Beautifully detailed and often grotesque illustrated scrolls emaki depicting these parades, such as the famous Muromachi period Hyaki Yagyo Zu, illustrated scroll of the night parade of 100 demons, and later versions by artists like Toriyama Sekien, vividly portray the overwhelming and often bizarre assortment of supernatural beings. Folkloric accounts consistently warned of the severe dangers to any unfortunate human who accidentally witnessed this unholy procession. Here's a quirky and perhaps apocryphal fringe tidbit. For you, some very local legends or old wives' tales claimed that if you were truly unlucky and accidentally left your window unshuttered during a Hayaki Yagyo, and a particularly fearsome oni happened to peek in with malicious intent, the quickest and possibly only way to save yourself was to have a very specific and rather obscure type of lucky red bean paste azuki readily available. You were supposed to immediately throw a handful of this special azuki paste directly at the oni's face. Apparently, even the most fearsome, club-wielding demons have oddly specific and somewhat underwhelming legume-based deterrents. It would certainly make your emergency paranormal preparedness kit a bit unusual. Holy water, salt, silver, and a very large sack of magically potent red bean paste. Because you just never know when an oni might get peckish for a very specific kind of bean while trying to terrorize your household. The exact origins and primary symbolic function of the Hyaki Yagyo motif are still debated by folklorists and scholars. Was it a literal folk belief in actual nocturnal spirit processions that people genuinely feared encountering? Was it perhaps a metaphorical representation of the uncontrollable chaos of nature, societal anxieties, or the unseen disruptive forces always lurking just beyond the edges of the orderly human world? Or could it have been a kind of carnivalesque, folkloric inversion of orderly human religious processions and official courtly parades? A way of acknowledging and giving form to the wild, untamed side of existence. It's likely a rich combination of all these elements, a testament to the vibrant and sometimes terrifying imagination that peopled the Japanese night with such a wondrous array of spirits. So, you've just survived in your imagination. At least the terrifying, cacophonous, and utterly bizarre spectacle of the Hayaki Yagyo, the night parade of 100 demons, where our familiar Tsukumogami friends, the Keisa Obake, the Bakizori, the Chochin Obake, and a host of other animated household items were having their big night out, parading alongside powerful oni and mischievous animal spirits. It's a vivid, unforgettable image, isn't it? But how do we even have such a clear picture of these often elusive folkloric beings? A huge part of the answer lies in the rich tradition of Japanese art, which delighted in capturing these supernatural entities, giving them form, personality, and a lasting place in the cultural imagination. While folk tales and oral traditions kept these beliefs alive, it was often the visual artists who truly brought the Tsukumogami and their yokai brethren to life, or rather, to a very lively unlife, for generations to see. The primary medium for showcasing these creatures in narrative form, especially in earlier periods, was the Amakemono Hui Huan Wu, or illustrated handscroll. An Amakemono is a marvel of storytelling, a long scroll of paper or silk, sometimes many meters in length, that you would unroll from right to left, revealing a sequence of paintings accompanied by explanatory text. It was like the ancient Japanese version of a really long, beautifully painted comic book, or perhaps a very elaborate, manually operated animated GIF, but usually involving significantly more vengeful teapots and fewer superheroes in brightly colored spandex. The most famous and directly relevant of these is, of course, the Tsukumogami, Emaki Fusang Shen Hui Huan, or the illustrated scroll of tool spirits. Dating primarily from the Muromachi period that's roughly the 14th to 16th centuries, this scroll, and its various versions, tells a specific story. It often begins with a scene of susuharai, that end-of-year house cleaning we've touched upon, where old worn-out household tools, pots, pans, musical instruments, umbrellas, pretty much anything that had seen better days, are unceremoniously discarded. Feeling neglected and resentful at this shabby treatment after years, or perhaps a century, of faithful service, these tools gather together. They consult with each other, perhaps seeking the guidance of an onmyoji, a master of yin-yang divination, or a particular kami, and then undergo their transformation into yokai, their goal, revenge on the humans who threw them away. They often form their own hyaki-yagyo, parading through the streets, causing mischief and terror. The scroll vividly depicts their various animated forms, often a delightful mix of the original object's features combined with new, grotesque or comical limbs, eyes, and mouths. However, the story in many versions of the Tsukumogami Emaki doesn't just end with chaos. Often, the newly minted Tsukumogami are eventually confronted by a Buddhist monk, a powerful spiritual hero like Myoren, a legendary figure associated with yokai stories, or a protective deity. Through Buddhist teachings, prayers, or a display of spiritual power, the Tsukumogami are subdued, their anger is pacified, and they may even convert to Buddhism, finding a form of enlightenment or peaceful rest, thus underscoring a common theme of Buddhist compassion, eventually taming even resentful spirits. Another crucial type of scroll for seeing Tsukumogami in action is the Hyaki Yagyo Emaki Baigui Yeishing Huihuan, the illustrated scroll of the night parade of 100 demons. Several versions of this exist, some also dating back to the Muromachi period. Unlike the Tsukumogami Emaki, which tells a more focused narrative about the tools themselves, the Hyaki Yagyo Emaki is often more of a spectacular visual catalog, a sprawling panorama of the parade itself, showcasing an absolutely bewildering variety of yokai. Here, our Tsukumogami friends are key participants, jostling for space amidst fearsome oni, shape-shifting animal spirits, and all sorts of unclassifiable horrors. You'll spot the Kasa Obake hopping along, the Shoshin Obake bobbing its eerie light, and many other animated objects adding their unique brand of weirdness to the procession. These scrolls are a feast for the eyes, filled with dynamic movement, expressive characters, and a delightful sense of both terror and anarchic fun. Some art historians have noted that in certain Hyakki-Yagyo scrolls, the Tsukumogami often seem to be having the most uninhibited fun in the entire parade. It's almost like they're on a rebellious, cathartic holiday from their long, mundane household duties, gleefully clattering, bouncing, and chanting their way through the night, while the more traditionally fearsome Oni look like they're just grimly on business, fulfilling their demonic quotas. It's the yokai equivalent of the normally quiet office workers finally letting completely loose at the annual company picnic, much to everyone's surprise and slight alarm. As we move into the Edo period, 1603–1867, with the rise of a vibrant popular culture and the development of woodblock printing ukiyo-e, images of yokai, including Tsukumogami, became even more widespread and accessible to a larger audience. The artist Toriyama Sekian, working in the late 18th century, was an absolute master at this. He produced a series of incredibly influential illustrated yokai encyclopedias, starting with Gazu Hyakki-Yagyo, the Illustrated Night Parade of 100 Demons, in 1776, followed by several sequels like the Konjaku Geizu Zoku Hyakki, Illustrated 100 Demons from the Present and the Past, and the Geizu Hyakki Tsurezure Bukuro, the Illustrated Bag of 100 Random Demons. Toriyama Sekian was basically the John James Audubon of Japanese yokai. And here, observe, we have the lesser spotted umbrella ghost, the Kasa Obake, in its natural, rainy, nocturnal habitat. Note the distinctive single, judgmental eye and its characteristic, somewhat wobbly, hopping gait. He didn't just draw them. He often gave them names, sometimes inventing them or popularizing obscure local ones, and added witty, erudite captions, effectively codifying the appearance and lore for many yokai, including a host of Tsukumogami. Many of the now standard visual forms for these creatures come directly from his imaginative and beautifully executed prints. Other renowned ukiyo-e artists like Katsushika Hokusai of Great Wave fame, Utagawa Kuniyoshi, and Tsukioka Yoshitoshi also depicted yokai ghosts and supernatural themes in their work, sometimes featuring Tsukumogami in scenes of everyday life being disrupted, or as part of larger ghostly gatherings. These prints made yokai dynamic, accessible, and even fashionable subjects. It was through this rich artistic tradition that many of the visual characteristics of Tsukumogami became so firmly established the single, staring eye of the Kasa Obake and Chochin Obake, the comically spindly limbs and expressive face of the Bakazori, the way musical instruments would sprout human-like torsos or faces, always cleverly incorporating the features of the original object into its new, animate form. The overall artistic atmosphere was often a delightful and uniquely Japanese blend of the grotesque, the humorous, the uncanny, and sometimes a subtle touch of pathos for these old, discarded things given a second, spirited life. A mainstream historical fact is that Japanese emakimono illustrated narrative hand scrolls from the Muromachi period, most notably the influential Tsukumogami emaki, and subsequently the widely popular Edo period ukiyo-e woodblock prints and illustrated books created by artists such as the renowned Toriyama Sekian, played an absolutely crucial role in visually defining, popularizing, and transmitting the complex folklore of Tsukumogami and a vast array of other yokai. These artworks effectively established many of their now iconic appearances and characteristic behaviors that are still recognized and drawn upon in Japanese culture today. Beyond scrolls and prints, Tsukumogami and other yokai also found their way into smaller crafts, netsuke, those intricate miniature carvings, often made of ivory or wood, which were used as toggles for hanging personal items from a sash obi, frequently featured yokai as subjects. You might find a tiny, exquisitely carved netsuke of a kasa obake, or perhaps a comical bakazori. It's like having a miniature, pocket-sized yokai on your belt. A little personal reminder that even your most humble footwear might have grand, noisy, and possibly slightly judgmental ambitions. And it probably also helped keep your actual pockets from deciding to animate and run off on their own with your spare change. The interplay between folk belief and artistic representation is always a fascinating one. Did the artists simply reflect pre-existing, fully formed beliefs about what these Tsukumogami looked like and how they behaved? Or did the artists' own creativity, their humor, and their desire to create visually engaging and memorable characters actually help to shape, solidify, and even invent some of the specific details and personalities of these yokai for the popular imagination? The degree to which the often standardized visual depictions of Tsukumogami in Edo period art by influential figures like Toriyama Seikien represent wholly authentic, widespread pre-existing folk beliefs versus being, in part, the artist's own creative interpretations, clever syntheses of various vague traditions, or even imaginative inventions based on sometimes scant textual references, remains a wonderfully fascinating area of ongoing inquiry and discussion for yokai studies and art history. It's likely a delightful dance between folklore and artistic license, each influencing the other. We've had a grand time looking at the incredible artistry that brought Tsukumogami to life on scrolls and woodblock prints, solidifying their images in the Japanese cultural consciousness, especially during the vibrant Edo period. Artists like Toriyama Seikien didn't just draw monsters. They cataloged a universe, giving form and often names to these spirited everyday objects. But as societies change, as new ways of thinking and living emerge, what happens to such enchanting, and sometimes unsettling, folk beliefs? Did the kesa obeki eventually just hop off into the sunset? Or did the bakazori finally chant its last kararin, korarin? Let's consider how the winds of modernization and shifting lifestyles might have affected the literal belief in these tool spirits. The Edo period, with its flourishing popular culture, arguably saw the Tsukumogami and other yokai reach a kind of peak in terms of their visibility and popular appeal. They were characters in stories, stars of artworks, subjects of playful speculation. But the Edo period also paved the way for one of the most profound transformations in Japanese history, the Meiji Restoration, which began in 1868. This era ushered in a period of incredibly rapid modernization, industrialization, and westernization, and these sweeping changes couldn't help but impact the spiritual and folkloric landscape. One of the most significant factors was the change in material culture. Remember, the classic Tsukumogami arises from an object, often a handcrafted tool, that has served for a very long time, typically 100 years. With industrialization came mass production. Suddenly, household items, pots, pans, lanterns, umbrellas, even footwear, could be made more cheaply, more uniformly, and often with a shorter lifespan. The idea of a single paper umbrella or a pair of straw sandals lasting for 100 years, being lovingly repaired and passed down through generations, became less and less common. Objects started to become more disposable. It's much harder for your plastic spatula from the discount store, designed for a couple of years of service at best to achieve venerable Tsukumogami status and develop a profound spiritual personality. Its main ambition is probably just to survive the dishwasher cycle without melting into an abstract art piece. Never mind sprouting an eye and demanding spiritual fulfillment after a century of stirring soup. New materials, metals, glass, and eventually plastics began to replace traditional wood, bamboo, paper, and clay for many everyday items. Did these new, often factory-made materials possess the same inherent potential for kami or spirit as those crafted from the living earth? That's a question that probably troubled fewer and fewer people. A culture of replacement, of built-in obsolescence, began to take root, which is somewhat antithetical to the long, patient gestation period required for a Tsukumogami to awaken. Alongside these material changes came a profound shift in worldviews, driven by the introduction of Western science, technology, and philosophical thought. The Meiji government actively promoted civilization and enlightenment bunmei kaika, which often involved a critical look at older folk beliefs and traditions, sometimes dismissing them as mere superstition in the face of modern scientific rationalism. The emphasis shifted towards empirical evidence, material explanations for phenomena, and a more secular approach to many aspects of life. While Shinto itself underwent its own transformations and reassertions as a state ideology, the more animistic, localized folk beliefs, like the idea that your old teapot might genuinely be watching you, probably found themselves increasingly on the defensive in more enlightened urban circles. Imagine trying to explain to your rapidly modernizing 19th century Japanese ancestor, who is perhaps now embracing Western suits and learning about steam engines, that their great-grandchild, here on May 16, 2025, thinks the family's 150-year-old heirloom teapot is just a charming antique with some interesting historical value, and not, as they might have quietly suspected, a potentially rather opinionated yokai elder who might, at any moment, start offering unsolicited critiques of their tea-making skills or their modern life choices. The disappointment, or perhaps just bemused resignation, would surely be palpable. Changes in lifestyles and living environments also played a part. As Japan urbanized, and people moved from traditional, often multi-generational rural households, where old objects might accumulate naturally in storerooms and attics, and where folklore was a vibrant part of daily life, to more compact, modern urban dwellings, there was simply less space, both physically and perhaps culturally, for legions of ancient, potentially spirited tools. A modern apartment, with its clean lines and newly purchased conveniences, is perhaps a less conducive environment for a bakazori to feel 100 years of neglect, and then decide to go on a nightly rampage, than the shadowy, history-soaked corridors of an old wooden farmhouse. Our relationship with our possessions shifted. Consumerism brought more things, but perhaps less deep, long-term personal connection to each individual item. The direct oral transmission of folklore also faced challenges. As communities changed, as literacy spread, and as new forms of mass media and entertainment emerged, the old stories told around the village hearth or by grandparents on a winter's night might not have been passed on with the same frequency or with the same degree of literal belief by younger generations. These tales began to move from the realm of lived experience and cautionary tradition into the category of folklore, something to be collected, studied, or enjoyed as charming stories from the past. A mainstream historical fact is that the rapid modernization and industrialization of Japan, particularly during the Meiji Restoration starting in 1868 and continuing through the subsequent periods, led to profound changes in the nation's material culture. Mass-produced goods gradually began to replace many traditional, long-lasting handcrafted tools and household items. This shift, combined with the widespread introduction of Western scientific thought, new educational systems, and evolving lifestyles, contributed to a noticeable decline in the literal, widespread belief in Tsukumogami as actively manifesting spirits among much of the populace. Consequently, these fascinating beings transitioned more firmly into the realm of folklore, artistic representation, and cultural heritage rather than being entities one genuinely expected to encounter or needed to appease in daily life. So, did belief in Tsukumogami simply vanish? Not entirely, but it certainly transformed. For many, these creatures moved from being potential, if quirky, realities in their own homes to becoming beloved or amusingly spooky characters in stories, in art, and eventually, in the 20th and 21st centuries, in manga, anime, and video games, which we'll touch upon in our next section. The idea of them, their charming forms, and the moral lessons they often carried about respecting objects, these things endured. However, it's interesting to note that even as literal belief in a sentient umbrella might have faded for many, the underlying animistic sensibilities of Shinto, that feeling that there's more to the world than meets the purely material eye, and the cultural value of motenai, that deep-seated regret over waste and an inherent respect for objects, have continued to influence Japanese culture in profound ways. And here's a quirky and rather fun fringe tidbit for our modern times. Some contemporary Japanese urban legends or humorous anecdotes occasionally surface, often online, about very old, neglected computers from the early digital age, or perhaps first-generation household robots from the late 20th century, starting to exhibit bizarre glitches, inexplicable behaviors, or even what seems like distinct personalities. It's almost like a tongue-in-cheek, playful nod to the old Tsukumogami concept, but updated for our technological era. Imagine your ancient, brick-like mobile phone from the 1990s, after decades of dedicated if somewhat erratic service and probably surviving a few accidental drops, suddenly demanding a full software update to achieve true yokai sentience, complete with a tiny, pixelated single eye and a ringtone that sounds suspiciously like a Bakazori chant. Sociologists and folklorists today, on May 16, 2025, continue to discuss the complex ways in which traditional beliefs like that in Tsukumogami don't necessarily die out entirely. Instead, they often transform, finding new expressions, metaphorical relevance, or even experiencing revivals in different forms within modern, industrialized societies, even as widespread literal belief in their original physical manifestation may wane. The spirit of the Tsukumogami, it seems, is as resilient as some of those old tools themselves. We've journeyed through the quieter, more traditional lanes of ancient Japan, pondering how the advent of modernization, industrialization, and shifting worldviews in the Meiji era and beyond might have led to a decline in the everyday, literal belief in Tsukumogami, those charming, often mischievous yokai born from hundred-year-old tools. It might seem like these spirited household objects would fade into mere historical curiosities. But the fascinating thing about powerful folkloric concepts is that they rarely disappear entirely. Instead, they often transform, finding new ways to echo and resonate in the cultural imagination. And so it is with our Tsukumogami friends. Their charm and their underlying messages still ripple through modern Japan, and increasingly the world, here on this very May 16, 2025. Perhaps the most vibrant and visible afterlife for Tsukumogami today is in the endlessly creative realms of Japanese popular culture, especially manga, anime, and video games. If you're a fan of these media, you've almost certainly encountered Tsukumogami, or characters directly inspired by them, even if you didn't always know their specific folkloric pedigree. Many iconic Tsukumogami, such as the Kasa Obake umbrella ghost, the Bakezori sandal spirit, and the Chochin Obake lantern ghost, whose distinctive visual forms were so wonderfully popularized and codified by Edo period artists like Toriyama Sekian, have experienced a significant and delightful resurgence. A mainstream historical fact is that these classic yokai are frequently featured as recurring characters in manga and anime series, most notably in the works of the legendary Shigeru Mizuki, whose series Gegege no Kitaro has been a beloved touchstone for generations, introducing countless children and adults to a vast bestiary of Japanese supernatural beings, with Tsukumogami often playing quirky, memorable roles. They also pop up in many other contemporary fantasy series, video games like the Yokai Watch franchise, and character design, introducing them to new audiences both within Japan and globally. Sometimes they retain their classic mischievous or slightly spooky natures. Other times they are reimagined as cute companions, formidable allies, or even angsty anti-heroes with complex backstories. If your ancient, discarded Japanese tools from centuries past could see their modern anime counterparts, often depicted as surprisingly cute, unexpectedly angsty, or even capable of dramatic heroic transformations with elaborate power-up sequences, they'd probably be very, very confused. Back in my day, a ghostly Kasa Obake might grumble. We were content to just hop out, lick a few faces, and generally be unsettling. Now you have a tragic origin story, a signature finishing move, and a line of merchandise the youth of today. Beyond these direct appearances, the very idea of sentient objects, of tools having a personality or a secret life, is a recurring trope that draws from this deep folkloric well. The visual legacy is undeniable. The one-eyed umbrella or the lantern with a lolling tongue are instantly recognizable motifs, shorthand for enchanted Japanese object. But the echoes of Tsukumogami beliefs aren't just confined to entertainment. The underlying cultural ethos that fostered respect for objects, the idea that things have a kind of inherent dignity or spirit, still finds expression in modern Japan through the enduring concept of motenai wuti wuai. We touched on this earlier. It's that uniquely Japanese feeling of regret when something useful is wasted, a deep-seated aversion to needless consumption, and a corresponding appreciation for cherishing resources and objects. While most people today probably don't consciously practice motenai out of a literal fear that their discarded rice cooker will animate and seek revenge, the sentiment itself encourages a mindful approach to possessions that resonates with the Tsukumogami spirit. It's there in the meticulous Japanese craftsmanship that values longevity and quality, in the careful use of resources, in the art of repairing beloved items rather than instantly replacing them, and even in some aspects of modern Japanese minimalism, which emphasizes owning fewer, but more meaningful and well cared for things. The spirit of motenai is so strong. You sometimes feel a pang of genuine guilt throwing away a slightly bent but still theoretically functional paperclip. You start thinking, oh dear, what if it was just 99 years, 11 months, and 29 days away from becoming a really cool, articulate paperclip yokai with surprisingly strong opinions on modern office supplies and the proper filing of documents. The internal struggle can be surprisingly real. This traditional value has also found a powerful new relevance in the context of modern environmental consciousness and sustainability movements, both in Japan and globally. The subtle influence of Shinto animism also lingers. While explicit, daily belief in kami inhabiting every specific object might not be as prevalent as it once was, a general, cultural sensibility of respecting nature, of acknowledging a certain spiritual presence in well-crafted items or historically significant places, often persists. You see it in the small household Shinto shrines kamidana, in the rituals for purifying a new car or a new building site, or simply in the profound aesthetic appreciation for the spirit of natural materials used in art and architecture. This provides a continued cultural context where the idea of objects having a kind of inner life doesn't feel entirely alien. Even in our everyday language and a more secular mindset, we often find ourselves attributing personalities to our cherished possessions. We talk about a well-loved old car having a soul, a favorite musical instrument that seems to play itself sometimes, or an old house groaning with memories. These are, in a way, modern, metaphorical Tsukumogami, born not necessarily from 100 years of existence, but from the depth of our emotional connection and the history we share with these things. If my own rather elderly smartphone ever makes it to its 100th year, sometime around May 16, 2115, assuming it hasn't already been recycled into smart fridge components, I fully expect it to not just become a Tsukumogami, but to have already self-published its disgruntled tell-all memoir as a viral, unblockable NFT, complaining bitterly about all the terrible selfies I made it take and the sheer number of times I dropped it. And finally, the charm of Tsukumogami, and Japanese yokai in general, has undeniably gone global. Thanks to the international popularity of manga, anime, Japanese films, and video games, characters like the Kasa Obaki are becoming familiar figures far beyond Japan's shores. There's a universal appeal to the idea that the mundane objects of our daily lives might have a secret, hidden existence, a personality we don't usually see. It taps into a childlike sense of wonder, and perhaps a touch of that delicious, shivery unease. It's truly wonderful that these unique spirits, like the Tsukumogami, are now finding fans all over the world. Soon, we'll all be checking under our beds not just for generic monsters, but specifically for a slightly judgmental Bakazori, who might want to critique our choice of house slippers, or offer unsolicited opinions on our late-night snacking habits. International yokai relations at its finest. Here's a delightful, quirky, fringe tidbit. For our modern times, there's a contemporary Japanese trend, particularly visible online among artists, crafters, and collectors, of creating absolutely adorable, often very soft and huggable, plush toy versions of various yokai, including the classic Tsukumogami, like the Kasa Obaki or even the Chochin Obaki. It's like taking the potentially grumpy, definitely old, and possibly slightly resentful 100-year-old discarded umbrella spirit and giving it a complete kawaii makeover for the 21st century, transforming it into something you'd want to cuddle rather than run screaming from, which, on this fine day of May 16th, 2025, seems like a perfectly appropriate and rather heartwarming evolution for these ancient spirits. Cultural critics and media scholars, naturally, continue to analyze and debate whether the modern portrayal of Tsukumogami and other yokai in popular media primarily serves to preserve and accurately transmit genuine folkloric traditions and their original nuances, or if it often significantly reinterprets, sanitizes, or commercializes these fascinating figures to better fit contemporary entertainment narratives, consumer tastes, and global marketability. It's likely a mix, as culture always is, a dance between the old and the new. But what's clear is that the Tsukumogami, born from a deep respect for objects and a world alive with spirits, still have something to whisper to us, even now. We've seen how the delightful, and sometimes a tad unsettling, spirits of Tsukumogami have danced from ancient Japanese folklore right into the vibrant popular culture of today, May 16, 2025, appearing in manga, anime, and even inspiring a new wave of adorable plush toys. Their forms may be reinterpreted, their scariness softened, but their essential charm, that idea of everyday objects waking up with a mind of their own, clearly still captivates us. As we prepare to gently close the paper screens on this particular exploration, it feels right to linger for a moment longer and reflect on the deeper meaning, the enduring soul, if you will, behind this enchanting belief in the Tsukumogami? What does it really tell us about our relationship with the things around us? Beyond the whimsy of a one-legged umbrella or the spookiness of a lantern that suddenly sprouts a leering face, the Tsukumogami tradition offers a profound perspective on the material world. It invites us to see the objects we live with not merely as inert tools or disposable commodities, but as entities that, through long association and service, can accumulate a kind of history, an essence, perhaps even a rudimentary consciousness or spirit. If our modern gadgets, for instance, were to follow this ancient rule and become Tsukumogami after 100 years of dedicated or perhaps begrudging service, just imagine the yokai parades of the future. Hordes of sentient smartphones endlessly complaining about low battery warnings, packs of slightly judgmental fitness trackers publicly shaming everyone's step count, and a solemn procession of self-important smart fridges haughtily demanding only the finest artisanal ice and organic, locally sourced kale. It would be a spectacle. At its heart, the belief in Tsukumogami seems to stem from the idea that objects are witnesses to our lives and containers of our memories and energies. Think about it. That old wooden bowl has held countless meals, been warmed by countless hands, and been present at countless family conversations. That paper scroll has been carefully unrolled and read by generations, its surface absorbing the oils from fingertips, the scent of incense, the quiet atmosphere of study or contemplation. The Tsukumogami belief suggests that this long, intimate contact isn't a one-way street. The objects themselves absorb something of us, something of the human lives that unfold around them. They become silent chroniclers, their very substance imbued with the patina of shared experience. Even today, in our often very different world, don't we feel something similar about cherished heirlooms, that old watch passed down from a grandparent, or a much-loved childhood toy? They seem to hold a presence, a personality, a soul that transcends their mere materiality. The 100-year rule also speaks volumes about the value of longevity and enduring service. In a world like 10th century Japan, where most items were painstakingly handcrafted and intended to last, an object reaching a century of use was a testament to its quality, its durability, and the care it had received. For such an object to then awaken with a spirit could be seen as a kind of ultimate reward or recognition for its long and faithful contribution. This offers a powerful counter-narrative to our modern culture of rapid obsolescence and disposability, where things are often designed to be replaced quickly. The Tsukumogami gently remind us of the dignity in endurance, the beauty in things that have weathered time, and the inherent value in craftsmanship that aims for longevity. This, of course, circles back to that fundamental animistic worldview of Shinto that we explored earlier, the idea that kami, or spirits, can inhabit all things, from mountains and rivers to the very tools in your hand, creates a world that is inherently alive, interconnected, and deserving of respect. The Tsukumogami are a specific, charmingly domestic manifestation of this broader belief. Seeing spirit in the everyday encourages a different kind of relationship with our material surroundings, one that is less about pure, unthinking utility or consumerist acquisition, and more about a sense of relationship, participation, and mindful respect. This ancient animistic sensibility also finds a surprisingly modern echo in contemporary ecological consciousness. That growing awareness of the interconnectedness of all things and the need to treat our planet and its resources with care, as if they too possess a kind of aliveness that sustains us. So, what do we mean when we talk about an object having a spirit or a soul in the context of Tsukumogami? It's not necessarily a human-like soul in the theological sense, with personal salvation or an immortal destiny. It's more akin to an emergent essence, a distinct presence, an accumulated energy or character that develops over time. It's the thingness of the thing becoming beingness. It could be fueled by the years of human interaction, the emotions imprinted upon it, the inherent spirit of the natural materials it was made from, or perhaps a spark of that universal kami that Shinto sees everywhere. It's about finding the magical in the mundane, recognizing that even the most ordinary-looking paper lantern has the potential to flicker with an extraordinary inner light. A mainstream historical fact is that the underlying animistic worldview of Shinto, which perceives kami spirits or divine essences not only in grand natural phenomena, but also potentially in all things, including well-used artifacts, provided the essential cultural and spiritual framework that allowed unique beliefs like that of the Tsukumogami to develop and flourish in Japan. This holistic perspective fosters a sense of inherent respect and potential sacredness in the material world, an attitude that often extends beyond overtly religious contexts into broader cultural values regarding objects, craftsmanship, and our environment. The lessons for our modern lives. Here on May 16, 2025, are subtle but resonant. The Tsukumogami belief, and the cultural values like moteinai that surround it, gently encourage us to be more mindful of our possessions, to value what we have, to repair rather than instantly replace, to avoid thoughtless waste, to perhaps consider the story of an object, the hands that made it, the resources it embodies. And here's a quirky and rather insightful fringe tidbit with a modern flavor. There's a popular Japanese decluttering philosophy and practice known as Danshari Duan-she Li. It involves the 3 steps of refusing new unnecessary things, disposing of current clutter, and detaching from the desire for possessions. While it's a modern approach to minimalism and mindfulness, it often involves a deep examination of one's relationship with objects and a call for respectfully letting go of things that no longer serve a purpose or bring joy. In its mindful consideration of possessions and the idea that objects have a right time or need a respectful parting, Danshari shares a distant, perhaps unconscious, echo with the ancient Tsukumogami lore, the underlying sense that our things matter, and our relationship with them has a kind of energy, lest they become, metaphorically speaking, heavy emotional baggage, or perhaps even a grumpy, clutter yokai lurking in the corners of our modern psyches. Anthropologists and philosophers continue to explore the fascinating cross-cultural phenomenon of attributing aliveness or spirit to inanimate objects. Is it a universal human cognitive tendency to anthropomorphize, to see intention and personality where there is none? Is it a culturally specific worldview, like the profound animism of Japanese Shinto? Or is it, most likely, a complex combination of innate human psychology and learned cultural frameworks that shapes our intricate and often deeply emotional relationships with the material world around us? Ultimately, the enchanting belief in Tsukumogami invites us to look at our everyday world with fresh eyes, with a sense of wonder, and perhaps with a touch more respect. So, the ultimate life hack from ancient Japan. Be nice to your toaster. Not only will it likely make you better, more evenly browned toast as a result of your positive energy, one can hope, but you'll also significantly reduce the risk of it teaming up with the disgruntled blender and the moody microwave to form a formidable kitchen appliance yokai supervillain team, bent on culinary chaos and demanding only the finest, artisanal breadcrumbs as tribute. Next time your very old computer crashes spectacularly right before an important deadline, just take a deep breath. Remember, it might not be a virus or a hardware failure. It could just be its 99-year-old proto-Tsukumogami spirit, having a particularly bad day, feeling unappreciated, and desperately needing a sympathetic ear to listen to its mournful dial-up modem noises. Or possibly just a very expensive sacrifice of brand new, top-of-the-line RAM, and a sincere promise to dust its fan more often. The soul of things, it seems, appreciates a little consideration. And so, as the last of the Tsukumogami, real or imagined, settle back into the quiet corners of our minds, our own journey into their charming and spirited world gently concludes. The paper lanterns flicker softly. The old wooden house sighs with its centuries of memory, and the playful spirits of tools, perhaps, drift back into a peaceful slumber. Or maybe they're just waiting for us to turn off the lights before their real adventures begin. We've learned that even the humblest object, given enough time and perhaps a touch of human feeling, might just develop a story, a personality, a soul all its own. It's a lovely thought, isn't it? A reminder to look at the everyday things around us with a little more kindness, a little more respect, and maybe even a spark of playful wonder. Who knows what secret lives they lead when we're not looking? May the idea of a world subtly alive with spirit bring a touch of gentle magic to your own surroundings. And as you prepare for your own rest, may you be surrounded by objects that feel content, respected, and decidedly un-yokai-like tonight. Let the gentle sounds of your own world, the soft hum of your fan, the distant murmur of the sleeping city, be your comforting companions. May your dreams be peaceful, and your waking be refreshed. Perhaps with a newfound appreciation for the quiet, loyal service of the everyday things that share your life. End of script. Sweet dreams.